The accounts of what the main political parties spent during last year's general election have been published today. They show that, as expected, the Conservatives were able to outspend Labour by over £3 million. But is there some devil in the detail? Our political correspondent Michael Crick has been sifting through the receipts. Michael, what's the devil?
Well, not just the devil, Matt, but also, I suspect, a fair bit of fiction as well. Officially, last May, the parties were allowed to spend on their national campaigns £19 million each. Well, today we got the official figures, and the Conservatives spent £15.5 million, Labour just over £12 million, the Lib Dems £3.5 million, UKIP just under £3 million, and the SNP £1.5 million. But it's got to be said, there is a fair bit of creative accounting and massaging that goes into figures like these. And also, at the local level, there are much lower limits on how much, in addition, local candidates can spend on their campaigns. And I think today I've come across a possible example of the kind of creative accounting I've been talking about in these bills for a very nice hotel in Ramsgate, where the Conservatives spent £14,000 during April and May. Now, the Conservatives say this was national spending. It got nothing to do, they argue, with the fact that Nigel Farage was standing in that particular constituency, and that the staff they had staying at that hotel were also working on other constituency campaigns, which is a bit odd because the nearest other local marginal is about an hour away. Now, if these bills for that hotel in Ramsgate were to be included regarded as a local expense, and I think a lot of experts would say they should be, that would have meant that Craig McKinley, the Conservative candidate in South Thanet, who is now the MP, spent almost twice as much on that campaign as the legal limit.
Now, on Wednesday night, we brought to light 4 expense claims totalling more than £14,000, which the Conservative Party spent at a hotel in Ramsgate during the general election. The issue, whether this was in fact a local campaign expense to defeat Nigel Farage in Thanet South, and therefore in breach of the rules. Well, our political correspondent Michael Crick joins us now with more news. Michael, what more can you tell us?
Well, Matt, yesterday the Electoral Commission told us that they were going to ask the Conservative Party why those hotel bills were regarded as a national expense rather than a local expense. And today, a local resident from Ramsgate, Michael Barnbrook, has written to Kent Police to complain about our report on what we said on Wednesday night. Now, it has to be said that Mr. Barnbrook is a former member of the BNP and of UKIP, but he does have quite an extraordinary record of making complaints against politicians. Several of his complaints in the past had led to politicians resigning or even being sent to jail. Now, it's well known that during the election, the Conservatives threw everything at Thanet South to try and stop Nigel Farage becoming an MP, including sending several leading figures down to run the campaign there. And today, a couple of them admitted to us that they'd stayed at the hotel in question at the Royal Harbour. But the party insists they've done nothing wrong, they've complied with the rules, and that these are genuinely a national expense because the people staying in the hotel were also working in other constituencies and dealing with national issues. Indeed, the local candidate, Craig McKinley, now the MP, told me tonight that, for instance, he was dealing with national journalists. The trouble is, from the Conservatives' point of view, is that if the hotel bills were to be regarded as a local expense, it would mean they were twice overspent on the Thanet campaign, and that would mean they could be in big trouble.
Quickly, Michael, also trouble for Labour when it comes to expenses.
Yes, the Electoral Commission today announced that they were going to investigate Labour over some late expenses that were not included in Wednesday's return. The late expenses in question were to do with the Edstone, on which the party spent nearly £8,000. As to why they were late, well, I suspect it's because they were embarrassed by the whole episode, which came to symbolise Labour's defeat. And they probably hoped that we'd go away and forget it. Well, we haven't forgotten it.
Earlier I spoke to the QC Gavin Miller. He's a leading expert in electoral law with Matrix Chambers. I asked him first what the rules are on expenses.
We have a very old set of statutory rules dating back to the 19th century that pin responsibility on candidates and agents to file an accurate return of their expenses after the election, one which shows them within the limit. If they don't, it's not an accurate return or it's a dishonest return, there are offences committed. We also have a policy of running short time limits for civil claims based on overspending or criminal prosecutions. Criminal time period is 1 year. So very often offences are committed, but they can't be prosecuted because nobody discovers until more than a year after the event that there's been a breach of the law. But on the face of it, if your report is right, these returns look like they're clearly wrong.
But there can be no action taken because the statute of limitations has expired.
Well, there can be no action taken for these very particular election law offences. We call them corrupt and illegal practices.
What is the law when it comes to what happens to people who might have been responsible for this?
I mean, if you asked the ordinary voter, the ordinary person in the street, they would say, well, that's all very well. But if people with a lot of money to spend on elections are orchestrating big campaigns, spending a lot of money on them, accommodation, administration expenses, and so on and so forth, and knowing that the returns their candidate and agents are putting in aren't accurate, that they have really spent more than that, the law would be an ass, wouldn't it, if it couldn't find a means of pursuing those responsible for that, at the very least investigating them. You make a representation to a returning officer. If it's wrong accidentally or because you don't know the law, there's no problem. But if it's deliberately wrong, and deliberately wrong repeatedly, and there are a group of people who know what they're doing and know why they're doing it, to make some sort of gain for their party at the election, to spend more than they're allowed to without being caught out, I would say that's worthy of an investigation by the police, and I think most people would.
But it sounds to me as if you're saying, well, I'm sorry, but I doubt if anything will be done this time.
Look, I'm very sceptical about this, I'm afraid. I don't think our legislation works. I don't think it's worked for years. I think there's been overspending without people being caught for many years. And I think we need to bring the legislation up to date. But in that gap that exists at the moment, there shouldn't be any problem if there has been dishonesty by agreement in finding criminal offences to investigate.
But I mean, to say the least, there is UKIP who will feel that they were, to some extent, done out of some of the action as a result of this, or they could argue that they might have been. And then, of course, there are going to be voters who are going to say, you're telling me this happens all the time.
People say, look, it's a grey area. I don't know if I'm the candidate or the agent, whether this, and this was spent. I don't know if this was lawful or not lawful. I relied on so-and-so. So-and says I relied on so-and-so. It's very difficult for a prosecuting authority, for the police.
Is there any legal power in this country which would say, I'm sorry, the law's an ass, we're going to fix it?
No, but European authorities have said for many years now that our archaic election law is in need of updating, that it's open to voting fraud, and the expenses and the expenditure regime is completely unregulated. So we're being watched from outside by the EU and the Council of Europe, and there have been some very serious criticisms about our law, and we can't go on hiding from them forever.
Gavin Miller, QC, and the UKIP MP Douglas Carswell, who fought that and won Clacton by-election, is with me now. Douglas Carswell, wasn't so long ago that you were a Tory MP. Did you know the party was up to this?
No, I didn't, and frankly, it's shocking. We ought to be shocked about this. I hope we haven't become so cynical about the political process that we just shrug our shoulders and think this is acceptable behaviour.
But you heard Gavin Miller, the QC who specialises in electoral law, he says everybody's up to it.
I'm sorry, I don't think that's good enough, and that's the sort of thing MPs said at the time of the expenses scandal. It's simply wrong to create a... Look, this is elementary stuff. Anyone who runs a party knows that in a by-election you have a £100,000 spending limit. It's not just that they seem to have flouted that. Look, for heaven's sake, if they're not going to be straight about how they win elections, these are the people who want to run our country. It's simply intolerable. You have to have a law that makes sure that you cannot, in effect, have an unfair advantage and buy an election, and you have to enforce it.
But the Conservatives say, look, we've accounted for everything and it's all above board and it's fine. Can that be true?
Well, you have the evidence sitting in front of you. Your investigation, and fantastic job it is, suggests that there are some questions that they certainly need to answer.
So what are you going to do about it? What's UKIP going to do? I mean, can you sue? Can you get the police to prosecute?
First of all,
what are you going to do?
Nigel was absolutely right when on the night of the Newark by-election he raised this issue. Once again, he's been prescient and ahead of the curve. But I think what we need to do is look at whether or not the Electoral Commission has enough powers to oversee this.
Will you be raising this in the House?
I will certainly be raising it with the Electoral Commission. I think the Electoral Commission needs extra powers so that they can deal with this.
You can't have a law. It's very interesting you should say that, because in fact we did go to them and they said, look, we know better than anybody. We do not have enough powers.
And I think that is the problem. Look,
but are you ever going to get MPs to vote to police themselves?
I think you can do that. I mean, part of the reason why we've seen this huge apparent overspend is the dire state of the big corporate parties means that when they have a by-election, they can't bus in volunteers because they don't have any, so they have to pay staffers to go and stay in these hotels to do the job. This is not how democracy is supposed to function.
Well, I mean, we are a mere media organisation, a news organisation. Will UKIP be making its own investigation into this?
I'm certainly going to take away the
Here you are, you can have this lot. Yeah, but they're all yours.
We cannot have a situation where you've got a legal spending limit of £100,000 and in effect a big corporate party can come in and just disregard the rules.
But what are we going to say to your followers tonight? Are we going to say that you're going to take this away and get it investigated? Or are we going to say Douglas Carswell is going to go and talk to the Electoral Commission and not a lot will happen?
Well, I think we need to talk to the Electoral Commission, because only if the regulator has the power to investigate, I think we'll get somewhere. We heard from the QC, the chances of the police taking this up are negligible.
Well, but you have the right to call the police's attention to it. Will you keep doing that?
I'll certainly look at the Electoral Commission. I'm not sure about the legality of complaining to the police. I think there's a time limit of a year on that.
But there are other laws that could be investigated, under which this could be investigated.
Certainly something needs to be done, because you cannot have a £100,000 spending limit and parties deliberately and apparently systematically
But I mean, the police can certainly say to you, we don't have the power, but you could test that. Are you going to ask the police? Are you going to ask the police to investigate this?
Well, let's see. I've just watched the report. I need to reflect on it, but I think something definitely needs to be done. You cannot have a situation where big corporate parties can throw vast amounts of money. It's just not how democracy is supposed to function.
Douglas Carswell, thank you for coming in. Revealed how in 3 critical by-elections in which UKIP were their key challengers, the Conservatives appear to have spent tens of thousands of pounds above the limit set by the law and never to have declared it.
Our evidence, according to a top independent legal expert, would provide reasonable grounds for a police investigation.
Good evening. By law, a party candidate is limited to £100,000 in electoral spending in a by-election. Rules designed to produce a level playing field. Tonight, were those rules flagrantly ignored by the Conservative Party as they sought to defeat an ascendant UKIP in 3 critical by-elections? In each, we have retrieved hotel bills for rooms in which party workers and bigwigs stayed during all 3 contests. The bills run into tens of thousands of pounds, which were seemingly never declared and which would have smashed through that legal spending limit. We report tonight how on the very night of one of the by-elections, the UKIP leader himself already had his suspicions.
You think they haven't kept within the law, the Conservatives?
Well, I don't know. I'd love to see what their returns are, because it seems to me the scale of campaign they fought here is so vast.
Well, the laws are there to guarantee an equal chance and ensure that no party can buy an election. But this programme has obtained evidence that in 3 key by-elections, the Conservative Party seemingly ignored the rules governing election spending and apparently failed to declare tens of thousands of pounds spent on accommodating campaign workers. We've seen hundreds of pages of hotel receipts, which show the party apparently spent over £100,000. Here are some of them. They've been heavily redacted. In one case, at least £50,000 of additional spending doesn't seem to have been declared. The Conservatives have told us all their spending was legal and proper. This exclusive report from our political correspondent Michael Crick does have flash photography from the start.
It was 2014. UKIP and Nigel Farage were soaring. They'd forced David Cameron to grant a referendum on Europe. then topped the polls in the Euro elections. The Conservatives were badly losing members to UKIP and votes. But what Tory High Command feared most was UKIP getting their first MPs in by-elections. Farage and his party had to be stopped. At any cost, it seems.
Channel 4 News has obtained a wealth of information which reveals just how much the Conservatives spent on 3 parliamentary by-elections in 2014 and appeared to show a contempt for the law, a law designed to create a level playing field and prevent any party simply buying election success. These detailed receipts seem to show how in each case the Conservatives simply bust the £100,000 legal spending limit that applies to by-elections and spent tens of thousands of pounds beyond that, spending and receipts which were never officially declared to the authorities and which we think should have been. Our evidence, according to a top independent legal expert, would provide reasonable grounds for a police investigation.
Our story starts with the by-election in June 2014 in Newark. Seen as UKIP's big chance to get their first elected MP. So worried with the Tories, David Cameron went to Newark 4 times. And the party flooded the seat with other ministers and MPs, working from 5 different offices, activists and an army of paid party staff from all over the country, some with strong links to Downing Street. A central figure in this and all 3 by-elections was Marion Little, senior campaign organiser at Conservative HQ, who recently got an OBE for political service. Helped by Richard Piper Griffiths, by-election coordinator, Richard Holden, deputy head of press, Simon Glasson, now an advisor to George Osborne, and from number 10, Stephen Gilbert, David Cameron's then political secretary, who is now Lord Gilbert. 5 names which recur in all 3 by-elections, the Tories' ground war team. In all, we've got the names of 16 Tory staff who were brought to Newark, though the real numbers probably much higher. This is Kelham House Country Manor, the ground war team's base in Newark, and we've got detailed records for their stay at this hotel. Their rooms were almost all booked under Marion Little's home address in Hertfordshire. Between the 2nd of May and polling day on the 5th of June, the period to declare expenses by law, the Tories took 59 nights accommodation here, running up a bill of £4,200. Money seemed no problem. And in the week of the Newark poll, they were joined by David Cameron's political secretary.
3 days before the by-election, Stephen Gilbert came to stay here for 4 nights, and he checked out the day after the result. But also he'd been here a couple of weeks before, on May the 21st, when, according to the bills, he'd enjoyed a 3-course meal, including Devon crab brulee and a bottle of Escondido Malbec.
While bigwigs enjoyed the smart country house, more junior staff stayed at the Premier Inn, clocking up 125 nights in all, and a total estimated bill of £6,250. Again, all seem to be registered to Marion Little's home address, and again, bills not declared by the party.
Jenrick Robert Edward, the Conservative Party candidate, £17,431.
The big investment seemed to pay off. The Conservatives won with a majority of more than 7,000. But Nigel Farage complained that night he thought the Tories had spent well beyond the £100,000 legal limit.
It is difficult to believe, given the number of paid professional people from the Conservative Party here, it is difficult to believe that their returns are going to come in below the figure.
So you think they haven't kept within the law, the Conservatives?
Well, I don't know. I'd love to see what their returns are, because it seems to me the scale of campaign they fought here is so vast Anyway, let's see what their returns are, but there will certainly be some questions.
The losing Lib Dem even put a figure on it.
What do you think the Conservatives spent on this campaign?
At a rough guess, I'd guess that over the course of it, they probably spent somewhere near £250,000. It's been a huge campaign on their behalf, and we could never match that sort of money.
When the new Conservative MP, Robert Jenrick, and his agent submitted their official spending return a month later, they claimed in the document to have spent £96,190.98. But nowhere in the return and all the attached receipts is any mention of the 2 hotels that we've found. If those hotels had been included, it would have taken them way above the spending limit of £100,000. And in case there's any doubt, the Election Commission guidance says you must include any hotel or similar costs for campaign workers.
But the day after he'd won, Mr. Jenrick insisted all would be within the law.
I'm certain the party stayed within the legal limits.
So you will be including on the expenses, will you, the salaries of all the officials that were brought in from all over the country, some of whom we see around us, and their hotel bills? That will all be included on the expenses return in 35 days' time?
Well, I'm sure the expenses will be submitted in accordance with the law, and I'm very confident the team putting them together.
4 months on, the Tories faced another by-election in Clacton amid an atmosphere of crisis after their MP Douglas Carswell defected to UKIP. Here too, dozens of paid Conservative staff were parachuted in to stay at local hotels, including the 5 from the ground war team. This is the Lifehouse Spa and Hotel near Clacton, the perfect place, says its website, for well-deserved pampering and relaxation. Tory staff were booked for 258 nights during the declarable period, which we reckon cost more than £20,000. More rooms at the Clacton Premier Inn would have added another 6,000 or so. The total between the 2 hotels was almost £27,000 in the time when expenses had to be declared. Yet neither bills for these hotels nor pay for the staff involved there appeared on the party's official expense return, which was more than £84,000, £16,000 below the official limit. Had hotels, meals and pay been included, it would have put the party well over the legal cap. 6 weeks later, the Tories faced an even bigger test in Rochester and Strood in Kent, where MP Mark Reckless had also switched to UKIP. David Cameron made 5 trips this time, and it's here we found evidence of the greatest spending of all. The by-election here in Rochester and Strood was another crucial battleground, and again the Tories deployed a huge team. Channel 4 News has discovered that the party spent around £50,000 here on hotel bills alone. The ground war team were here too, booked into the Bridgewood Manor Hotel near Rochester and the local Premier Inn. We know who stayed where and when. Once more, we've obtained bills for the hotel. Page after page after page, column after column. £80 a night, £80 a night for bed and breakfast. But also other things. They spent £905 on conference and function rooms, £107.50 on laundry, £679.55 on drinks, but a mere £57.82 on tips. Our analysis shows that in the relevant period, the Tories took out 446 nights of room bookings at Bridgewood Manor, which cost them more than £38,000, including extras. Then there's the Premier Inn in Rochester, where the bills are again mysteriously registered to Marion Little's home in Hertfordshire. 21 more staff here and lots more names, including rooms booked for a Mr. Conservatives. The whole bill here was more than £18,000. The total in bills for these 2 Rochester hotels, more than £56,000. We showed our evidence from all 3 by-elections to Bob Watt, an academic who specialises in election law.
Well, I find it very surprising because having looked at the electoral returns, the returns required by law, I would expect to see bills for accommodation included in the electoral returns, and I see little or no evidence of that.
Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with booking hotels or using party staff to fight a by-election campaign. But the law says that any such spending must be declared afterwards and kept within the legal limit of £100,000 for spending in a by-election. After the result here in Rochester and Stroud, the Tories claimed to have spent £96,793. But nowhere on their declaration were any hotel bills. And the staffing and accommodation costs that they did include bear no resemblance to what we've found.
And it wasn't just hotel accommodation. The party used at least 3 separate campaign offices, including a unit at this mall near the historic dockyard. Details were even given out on leaflets. But again, no mention in the expenses return. A quote for a unit of that size at the mall suggests it would have cost £5,000 at that time, plus rates and utilities.
I'm sure that no political party wants to be involved in electoral corruption. And I just feel that there is something here that I do not like the look of, because it does appear, and I've only seen your evidence, I haven't heard from the other side, and they must have their day in court, of course, but if these figures are as they appear on their face, it appears that there has been gross over-expenditure.
The Conservatives declined our request for an interview, but a party spokeswoman told Channel 4 News all by-election spending has been correctly recorded in accordance with the law.
So, no explanation, as we'd requested, as to why the Conservatives' huge hotel bills weren't declared. And no explanation why, strangely, so many rooms were booked through Marion Little's home address. The Electoral Commission told Channel 4 News tonight they'll consider whether any of our allegations come within their remit, or are strictly matters for the police to investigate.
Well, joining us now is the leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage, who lost the Thanet South seat to the Conservatives at the general election. And I'm wondering why you haven't made a formal complaint yourselves, because we broadcast this information about the hotel bills in your constituency.
Yeah, I've been complaining at several by-elections about the wholesale disregard for the law that the Conservative Party appear to have. What is interesting is why the Labour Party don't complain about any of this. I mean,
this is a rather generalised answer to a very specific question.
I'm moving on.
Why have you not complained?
Because I've got a referendum to fight. I don't look backwards in life, I look forwards. However, I think what you did last night and tonight, and we hear there have been some complaints today about the Newark by-election, I would be very surprised if a member of the public, or more than one member of the public, having watched that report from Thanet, didn't make it.
But surely it's your kind of democratic obligation.
Oh, yes, I agree with that.
Therefore, you have an obligation, seeing as you have some evidence, and you are involved, and there's still the statute of limitations is not run out on that.
Yeah, well, I tried at Newark.
Therefore, a case can be mounted.
I tried at Newark. I said the Tories had completely overspent the limit.
What about Thanet?
And I was accused of being a bad loser.
No, well, come on. What about Thanet? No, but bad losing is quite different from something which might be in contravention with the law.
I have no doubt that what happened in that Thanet constituency was in complete breach of electoral law, and I think Michael Crick's report paints it very... In fact, the hotel bills are actually bigger than the total spending limit for the short campaign. I am not myself going to make a complaint. UKIP are not going to make a complaint, but if members of the public do, and I'd be very surprised if they don't...
And that's after 4 constituencies that we've talked about, all of which are affecting UKIP. But you see, the point about this is, and we had this a little bit with Douglas Carswell last night, there's a sort of reluctance to take this forward, and one suspects or wonders whether perhaps you were doing the same thing.
No, the reluctance... No, I am entirely confident. And we were very, very careful, because we knew... Look, the Labour and Tory parties have had a pact on this. It's been going on for decades. They ignore the overspending of each other. We knew that if we won that seat, we'd overspent, they would come down on us like a ton of bricks. So are we compliant? Yes. But do I want to be seen to be a whinger? No.
But your own national returns seem to indicate some very heavy expenditure on local campaigns. That's exactly what the Tories were doing.
No, there is a very big difference. I mean, take wraparounds, for example, an issue that Michael raised earlier.
Yes.
There is a very big difference between looking at the law and saying, what can we do that's within the law, and wholesale disregard of the law. And frankly, booking out an entire hotel and putting senior Tory staff in it for a long time could not possibly have been national expenditure.
But you see, you spent £6,000 advertising in the Thanet Gazette, Thurrock being number 2 on your list of targets.
Yeah.
And you declared it as a national expenditure.
Yes, our view was you could do things like wraparounds without naming the candidate, without promoting the candidate, and that was entirely within electoral law. That was the judgment we took, but what we're comparing that with is wholesale, willful disregard of the law.
We had an election QC, a QC who specialises in election law, last night on, and he said this is widespread. This has been going on for years. Mm-hmm. And they are flouting an old 19th century election law which needs reform. And yet you could be the agent of reforming Britain's democratic processes, and you don't want to be.
I would like to reform this. I would scrap the entire postal voting system. And frankly, if the Conservatives have behaved like this...
Well, why don't you get your MP in the House of Commons to do just that?
What are they going to do in the referendum?
Why don't you get your MP in the House of Commons, who has the power to do this, to raise it and get it done?
Well, he did say last night he was prepared to write letters.
It's all sort of
I think if the public see a party complaining about itself, they say, oh, it's all sour grapes. Let the public pick up from these reports, and I'm absolutely confident they will.
But you see, the awful thing is, you said it's a two-party thing, that Labour and the Tories get up to it, but the truth of the matter is, it seems that everybody involved is really quite happy to let it go on.
No. I mean, I have complained by-election after by-election over the years about, as I say, postal vote rigging, overspending, and I've frankly been laughed at. And perhaps I'll be laughed at a bit less after these Channel 4 reports.
Last night, we brought you revelations about alleged overspending by the Conservatives in 3 by-elections. Tonight, we can reveal there are question marks over the party's expenses in one of the most hotly contested seats in the general election. Thanet South was where UKIP leader Nigel Farage hoped to secure his place in Parliament. In the end, the Conservatives held on. But Channel 4 News has seen receipts for thousands of pounds of election expenses amassed by the Conservatives in Thanet, which were not included on the local election expenditure return. In a moment, we'll have reaction from Nigel Farage, but first, here's our political correspondent Michael Crick's exclusive report.
Thanet South was probably the most fiercely fought of all constituencies at last year's general election, with UKIP leader Nigel Farage hoping at last to get his own seat at Westminster.
That's not too bad, is it? 27 votes.
The Tories were dead set on stopping him and threw money and paid staff at the seat.
McKinley, the Conservative Party
and their man, Craig McKinley, triumphed.
18,838.
But was all the Tory campaign expenditure included in the local spending return they legally had to submit after the result? A return which crept in just below the legal spending cap of £15,016. Last month, we found the Tories left out of that return these bills for more than £14,000 at the Royal Harbour Hotel in Ramsgate, in the constituency, where we found senior party figures from London stayed for many nights. The Tories told us the bills weren't included on the Thanet South return because it was national spending, that the staff who stayed here worked on campaigns across the country. The hotel owner, who stood as a Tory for Thanet Council, recalls their stay.
How many people did you have here staying from the Conservatives?
I don't know, because they came and went, and depending on the, as people do, check in and check out, leave early, arrive late and things. But they had a few rooms block booked. Yeah.
And this was quite an important place for them.
I think it was. Mr. Farage was going to be defeated by them, so I think they made sure that they had the right brains to do that here. Yeah, it was exciting times.
It was a sort of headquarters for them.
It was, yes. Well, all hotels become headquarters unofficially sometimes, but they all hang around and somewhere they can talk and eat and yeah, that's right.
Now we've found another local hotel, rather less smart, which doesn't appear on the Tories' Thanet South expenses either. The Margate Premier Inn isn't actually in the seat Nigel Farage fought, but nearby. Bills we've obtained include the name of Marion Little, a top Tory campaigner, much featured in our report last night. So were staff really here to thwart Farage? The rooms are registered to Conservative HQ in Westminster. The total bill, £4,242, for 6 campaign workers in all. The longest here, 12 nights. But those 2 hotels aren't the only questionable Tory expense from the Thanet South campaign. We've also found the Tories bought wraparound ads and other ads in 2 issues of Thanet Extra, a paper put out free in both Thanet seats, North and South. The party paid £16,483 for them, but declared them to the Electoral Commission as a national expense. True, the content in the ads was national rather than local, but we've had expert legal advice that such ads should still count as a local expense split between the 2 Thanet seats, given the paper's limited circulation area. If one were to add the 2 lots of hotel bills and a share of the newspaper ads to the Tories' official local return, they'd be 2.5 times over the legal limit. Whether the Conservatives exceeded the expense limits in Thanet South in the general election last May is a very different matter from the 3 parliamentary by-elections in 2014 on which this programme reported last night. For the 3 by-elections, the 12-month limit under which people can be prosecuted under the Representation of the People Act has now expired. But in Thanet South, the contest was only 9 months ago, so in theory, were a complaint to be investigated by the police or the Director of Public Prosecutions, then the MP, Craig McKinley, and his agent could have some explaining to do in court. Last night, Channel 4 News revealed how we'd found tens of thousands of pounds for hotel bookings during the 3 by-elections for paid Tory staff, many of them senior figures. And none of those bills we found appeared in their local expense returns. Yet Electoral Commission guidelines suggest hotels for party workers should be included. Last night, government whips issued this text message to Tory MPs.
Channel 4 are seeking responses on spending in recent by-elections. A Conservative spokesman said all by-election spending has been correctly recorded in accordance with the law.
And this morning, ministers leaving Cabinet seemed to have got the message.
I think we've spent everything exactly according to the rules.
You really think that?
Yes.
What do you think of the Conservatives spending tens of thousands of pounds in by-elections and not declaring it?
Excuse me?
You should abide by the law, shouldn't you? I mean, you're meant to be the party of law and order, aren't you? Got nothing to say? Not like you. Do you think the police ought to look at it? You've been told to say nothing about this.
I haven't been told anything.
But this senior MP who sits on the Conservative Party board, its governing body, says he's going to bring up our allegations with colleagues. Do you think our report last night will have shocked members of the board?
I think members of the board are always interested in what Channel 4 News has to say. Of course, there will be 2 sides to this. There is Channel 4's side and there is the Conservative Party side, and as I say, there will obviously be a third party involved in this, or I suspect a third party will want to take a look at this, and then they will decide as to who was right, whether the Conservative Party were right in their returns or whether Channel 4 was right to raise its concerns.
So if nobody else raises it at the board, you will?
I'm going to raise it at the board, but I suspect others will be raising it at the board. I mean, these are serious allegations. I'm not diminishing the nature of these allegations. These are serious allegations. But as I say, the Conservative Party believes it has complied with election law.
Mark John Reckless.
Mark Reckless was UKIP's successful candidate in the by-election in Rochester and Stroud, where we revealed the Conservatives spent £56,000 on rooms for party staff in just 2 hotels, which wasn't included in their legal return.
What you showed in your programme last night was quite extraordinary, and frankly, if that type of thing did happen and is allowed to continue, then our politics can just be bought up with people with the most money.
Tonight, we know of 2 complaints being made to the police, including one from Michael Payne, Labour's candidate in the Newark by-election. He says he's asked Nottinghamshire Police to investigate our evidence. Meanwhile, the Electoral Commission have said they're still assessing what we revealed on this programme 3 weeks ago about the bills at the Royal Harbour Hotel.
Jenrick Robert Edward, the Conservative Party candidate, 17,431.
It was the first time in a quarter of a century that Tories had won any by-election whilst in power. But their 7,000-plus majority cost them dear. They threw everything at beating UKIP in Newark, including thousands of pounds on keeping full-time party staff in local hotels. And many suspected the Tories had spent above the £100,000 legal cap on how much any party can spend in a by-election. A point I put to the winning MP at the time.
Their hotel bills, that will all be included on the expenses return in 35 days' time?
Well, I'm sure the expenses will be submitted in accordance with the law, and I'm very confident the team putting them together.
Earlier this week, Channel 4 News revealed we'd obtained hotel bills showing the party spent more than £4,000 on rooms for top staff at this smart hotel near Newark and an estimated £6,000 or more at the Newark Premier Inn. Nearly all the rooms were registered at the home address in Hertfordshire of a senior London official, Marion Little. Yet none of the bills appeared on the Tories' legal declaration of expenses. Today, I caught up with Robert Jenrick again.
Mr. Jenrick, how come you didn't declare these bills for these hotels? £10,000 worth of hotels not declared on your election return.
Michael, I think I said to you the morning after I was elected,
Indeed,
almost 18 months ago, I said that I'm very confident in the highly professional people who recorded and prepared our election expenses. I completely understand that, and any candidate and agent has to take responsibility, and I don't shirk from that. As I said to you at the time, we're very confident that all of our election expenses were recorded and have been submitted in accordance with the law.
More of him later. Earlier, I went to the offices of Newark Council, where anyone can go and read the Tories' by-election expenses and confirm that 2 hotels weren't declared. But the returning officer from the by-election says it's not his job to check or police the expense return.
Nope, we don't check them. They go to the Electoral Commission, who have a responsibility to have oversight to monitor expenses. And if there's any complaint about them, the police have the responsibility to investigate.
And the police have now asked to look at them this week.
I understand the police have received a complaint and they're looking at them. And quite what action they take, I'm not sure at this stage.
And Notts Police have told the Labour candidate from the by-election they've passed his complaint to a detective inspector in their fraud and finance team.
Was this all part of a cover-up?
There's no cover-up, Michael. There's nothing more I can say than that. I was very clear with you 18 months ago that all our election expenses were submitted in accordance with the law. I'm afraid I have to go and speak to my constituents now because we're meeting a whole group of constituents now.
It's important that when you make a declaration like that, it is accurate. And yet £10,000 worth of hotels belong to
I can't say any more than that. We're very confident that they were submitted in accordance with the law. I'm afraid there's no more I can say to you.
The Electoral Commission guidance.
It's nice to see you. It's nice to see you back in Newark. Thanks for your time.
Hotel bills for party workers. Do you want to revise the declaration?
At least Robert Jenrick said something. Here's what happened yesterday when I phoned the National Tory chairman, Lord Feldman.
Hello, Lord Feldman. It's Michael Crick here from Channel 4 News. I'm ringing up about the... Oh, the line seems to have gone dead. So tonight, Channel 4 News has written to Lord Feldman asking several questions, including why was that expenditure on hotel rooms in the 3 by-elections not included on the official candidates' spending returns? And did he, Lord Feldman, as National Party chairman, authorised that expenditure? And did David Cameron know about it? And why was 734 nights' worth of accommodation registered to the home address of party campaign organiser Marion Little? We look forward to the answers. Michael Crick, Channel 4 News, Newark.
Conservative Party-led workers involved in the controversial Clacton by-election have tonight demanded a full investigation into tens of thousands of pounds in undeclared spending, which they say may have breached the law. This programme has obtained new evidence that hotel rooms booked and paid for by the party during the by-election were seemingly not declared. Even the party's own election agent, who signed the declaration, had a room at one of the hotels. The extra spending would have put the party far over the £100,000 limit allowed by law. Our political correspondent Michael Crick has this exclusive report.
It looks like a quiet corner of East Anglia, but in the middle of 2014, Clacton-on-Sea was thrust centre stage in British politics.
It's just like the bride and groom. That's lovely.
The sudden decision of the local Tory MP Douglas Carswell to defect to UKIP was in effect a declaration of war. In the by-election that autumn, Clacton was flooded with Tory MPs, full-time staff and money.
I haven't written anything off, Michael. That's why I'm here.
All out to stop UKIP winning their first Westminster seat. It was run by a team from Conservative HQ in London, and emails and other evidence from Clacton show a pattern of behaviour across 3 by-elections the Tories fought that year.
We were taken over by central office staff. They acted so swiftly within 24 hours. They had a team of people, you know, knuckling down in our association office in Clacton, and they worked very hard indeed.
When Channel 4 News first exposed this story, we found that the Conservatives had spent almost £90,000 on 3 by-elections in 2014, which wasn't included on the party's official expense returns. If the money had been declared, then in each of those campaigns, the party would have been well over the official spending limit. In particular, we found that the Tories booked almost 1,200 nights of local hotel accommodation, none of it officially declared. And now we found another hotel here in the Clacton constituency. And we've also spoken to Tories involved in the campaign in this seat, who say that they're deeply shocked at the way their party seems not to have stuck by the law.
Katie Woodland had just become a paid Conservative campaign manager in Shropshire, and she was among staff brought to Clacton to help out, put up at the Premier Inn. We showed her bill for her room and hundreds of other hotel rooms the Tories booked in by-elections that year.
The fact that it happened in 3 by-elections, one after the other, it's systematic. And they know the law, you know, they've been running elections for years.
Indeed, the party sent Woodland on a legal training day where she learnt what expenses should be declared and about the £100,000 limit on by-election spending. That's why she's so shocked the hotels weren't disclosed.
I had a full day of this, that and the other. You cannot do this, you can't do that. You know, we had it drummed into us what notional was. You know, talking about you can't, you know, your stamp, if somebody donates some stamps to you, you still need to declare it. So all of us in that room went away knowing at no point can you spend more than what you're supposed to. You know, and the consequences are that you'll go to prison. You know, I'm not going to go to prison for anyone. To do it 3 in a row and to do it pretty big in a couple of the places means there was full intention behind it. You know, if they went over by a couple of rooms because they'd miscalculated, you know, £30–40 accidentally, that's different to, you know, 6, 7, 40, £50,000.
This is the Rock Hotel in Frinton-on-Sea, the 3rd local hotel at which we now know Tory staff stayed. We've seen evidence from just one 10-day spell that the party took at least 36 room nights here. But the hotels say they had party bookings for the entire month-long election. the owner of the Rock has explained to us that her hotel was especially convenient to Tory staff because it was only a couple of minutes' walk away from one of the main party campaign headquarters during the by-election, the annex to someone's house, which they called the Bunker. Room rates at the hotel were around £70 a night for bed and breakfast. So overall, this hotel meant an extra bill of several £1,000s. Again, undeclared. And the invoices were paid weekly and personally by the campaign supremo, Marion Little. Marion Little was the big Tory figure in Clacton. She works officially as campaign specialist at Conservative HQ and features heavily in all three by-elections we've looked at. We've now found across the three campaigns 770 nights of hotel rooms linked to Little in some way, often in her name and often booked to her home address in Hertfordshire. Some of those rooms in Clacton went to other top party staff, including Alan Mabbott, the party's legal officer, and Little's boss, Darren Mott, then deputy director and now head of campaigning. They all worked for Stephen Gilbert, who had a dual role as director of campaigning and as David Cameron's political secretary in Number 10. Now Lord Gilbert, he's helping the In campaign in the EU referendum. Gilbert reported directly to the two co-chairmen, Grant Shapps, who quit last year, and Lord Feldman, who's still there. All of them, except Shapps and Feldman, stayed at various times at the Lifehouse Spa and Hotel. But one of the longest residents there was Victoria Goff, the Conservatives' legal agent for the whole campaign. And a month after the Clacton result, Ms. Goff submitted to the returning officer her official expenses return, together with dozens of receipts.
But nowhere in these documents does there seem to be any mention of the £30,000 that we estimate the party spent on the three local hotels that we know about. Victoria Goff formally signed the statement, saying that to the best of my knowledge and belief, it is a complete and accurate return as required by law. Now this is the room list as booked by the Conservatives for the Lifehouse Spa Hotel. And you can see here, line 6, number of nights, it says 32, room 62, Miss Victoria Goff. Yes. So the agent for the campaign, the official agent, was actually staying in a hotel, and yet the expense of that hotel is not on her signed return.
Well, I can't really comment because, you know, I'm not privy to any of this information. This is the first I've seen it. What I can comment is that my knowledge of Victoria is that she's a very thorough, very professional campaign manager.
This roster shows that Victoria Goff had at least 24 people in her campaign team, rostered day by day to work in 6 different sectors of the constituency. At least 21 of these individuals stayed in the local hotels. One of those campaign offices was the so-called Bunker, not far from the Rock Hotel. And as the campaign came to an end, Marion Little gave orders to close it down and move the whole operation to the next by-election in Rochester. In this email obtained by Channel 4 News, Marion Little wrote,
"You will need to get kettles, clipboards, rosettes and balloons, leftover coffee, tea bags, pens back to Frinton Bunker. The helium canister needs to come to the bunker so we can get it to Rochester. All this kit is being collected at 7 a.m. tomorrow for onward transmission to Rochester. Finally, and most importantly, thank you. I look forward to seeing you all south of the river."
That email shows just how much it was one centrally run operation, moving round from one battle to another.
All that the central headquarters, central office will say is that all our spending was in compliance with the law. It's a simple...
Well, that's not good enough. I would say on television or on radio, that is not good enough. You owe it to the party members and to the individual associations to, you know, to look at this. They need to be investigating this fully. They should have had alarm bells ringing as soon as questions were asked. You know, and they should be scurrying to their accounts.
If I'd have known that they were going to not declare the hotel spend, then I would not have gone to Clacton. I would have questioned my own part in the party. I probably would not have stayed as a campaign manager, and I would have tried to get it investigated earlier on myself, because I don't agree with it and it shouldn't have happened.
This morning I caught up with Victoria Goff, now Victoria Karslake, the official agent who was legally responsible and submitted the official expenses returns.
You were the agent in the Clacton by-election, I believe, for the Conservatives. Why didn't you put all the hotel bills on your election return? Why didn't you put the hotel bills on the election return?
She told me to contact the party's press department.
I mean, you know that the Electoral Commission guidance says that hotel bills have to be included. And you stayed at one of the hotels yourself, didn't you?
The party said again tonight that all spending was correctly recorded in accordance with the law. But were Victoria Goff and the other agents really responsible, or simply told what to do by bosses? Was party chairman Lord Feldman involved, or even the party leader? Essex police say they're aware of the allegations and are cooperating with the Electoral Commission.
Now, the Electoral Commission has announced that it will extend its inquiry into Conservative Party campaign spending returns to include 3 by-elections in the run-up to last year's general election. The announcement follows a Channel 4 News investigation which raised questions over hotel bills during by-election campaigns at Newark, Clacton and Rochester and Strood in the summer and autumn of 2014. Our political correspondent Michael Crick joins us now from Salford. Michael.
Well, Christian, a fortnight ago, the Electoral Commission announced that they were holding a formal investigation into our allegations made on this programme, that in the general election in South Thanet, where Nigel Farage was standing for UKIP, the party spent about £16,000 on hotel bills and failed to declare that spending on their official expenses return. Well, today the Electoral Commission announced that they were widening their inquiry into our other allegations about the by-elections in 2014. We've said on the programme that the Conservatives spent almost £100,000 in those 3 seats, again on hotel bills for campaign staff. So it does now appear that the Electoral Commission is starting to take some of our allegations quite seriously, and indeed today, the Daily Mirror joined in and on its front page said that the party in the general election in numerous seats had failed to declare money that it had spent on bussing in party activists under its road trip scheme. This afternoon, the board of the Conservative Party held one of its regular meetings and actually discussed our stories there. And indeed, afterwards, my colleague Tim Bouverie caught up with Charles Walker, the MP, who put the item on the agenda.
I believe the party is compliant. The board believes the party is compliant. In essence, we think that Channel 4 has got it wrong. Now, of course, the Electoral Commission is looking into these things, but we maintain absolutely that the party is compliant.
But the Electoral Commission today has expanded its investigation. It's now investigating 4 elections.
The Electoral Commission can investigate what it's like. I'm not here to tell the Electoral Commission what to do or what not to do. Indeed, if I started doing that, you would be horrified. You'd call it interference in an independent body. What I'm saying, as a member of the Conservative Party board, is that I believe, as a party, we are compliant.
I understand that the discussion at the Conservative Party board this afternoon lasted about 10 minutes. 7 or 8 people contributed. They were discussing a report from the party's chief executive, Simon Day, arguing that actually this was in compliance with the law. And afterwards, the board decided that they were more confident than ever that they'd done nothing wrong and everything they'd done was perfectly legal.
It was the Tories' secret weapon, they boasted.
a fleet of branded coaches dispatched to take activists to battleground seats across the country. And all proudly chronicled on Facebook, Twitter and other social media.
I'm on the bus.
I'm on the bus.
I'm on the bus.
I'm on the bus.
An operation credited with last year's surprise victory for David Cameron and his chairman, Lord Feldman.
That was amazing. But I think this is the sweetest victory of all.
The operation also helped Craig McKinley defeat Nigel Farage in South Thanet.
18,838.
In recent weeks, we've exposed how the Conservatives in Thanet last year and in 3 by-elections in 2014 spent tens of thousands of pounds, which was never declared on their candidates' legal spending returns. In Thanet alone, they spent almost £20,000 on just 2 hotels. Now, if all these costs had been declared, it would have taken their candidates well above the legal spending limits. Tonight, we reveal further undisclosed costs for a fleet of buses that took Tory activists to and from the Thanet campaign. Because the law says any money spent on a candidate must be declared and stick within a legal limit to make our elections democratic and fair.
He's legged it. He's walked off the other way.
He said, come on. And this week, we finally caught up with Tory chairman, Lord Feldman.
Lord Feldman, did you break the law in spending all that money on those elections? In Thanet South and in the by-elections?
No,
Were you breaking the law?
We did everything in accordance with the rules.
If you did it in accordance with the rules,
yes.
Why are you willing to explain yourself fully in an interview?
Well, we're cooperating with the Electoral Commission, and we're going to go through all the detail with them, and I think that's the appropriate way to do it.
More on Lord Feldman later, and his sister's role. South Thanet was the big constituency battle of the 2015 election, with the Tories determined to stop Nigel Farage getting a foothold at Westminster.
That's not too bad, is it? 27 votes.
At least 5 times, probably many more, Tory buses hit the constituency, flooding it with activists to see the UKIP leader thwarted. It was the brainchild of Mark Clark, the so-called Tatler Tory, who denies claims he bullied a young party activist who committed suicide last year. Long before the Tories disowned Clark, his scheme was adopted with gusto by party bigwigs. Channel 4 News has found a wealth of material showing how the Tories organised this work. Pictures, emails, tweets, blogs and first-hand accounts from activists themselves as to how they were bussed around. They got free travel, food, drink and hotel rooms. But the law says any money incurred supporting a specific candidate has to be declared. And yet, in the Conservatives' official expense return for South Thanet, we can find no sign of any such costs. The Conservative coaches, like this one, picked activists up from rendezvous points in London and took them down to Kent. One of them was Satish Deela, who says he went all over the country as part of the campaign, sometimes known as Road Trip. Many of his trips, he says, were to South Thanet to help Craig McKinley.
So where did you go to a lot during the general election?
Mostly in Thanet.
South Thanet?
South Thanet, yeah.
In South Thanet?
Yeah.
To help Craig McKinley?
Craig McKinley and, yeah.
How many times do you think you went there?
Oh, 6, 7 times, maybe more.
6 or 7 times?
More, yeah, maybe more, yeah.
And this was what, on a coach?
Coach, yeah. Coach, sometimes trains and all, you know. Yeah.
So how many people would go on, with you?
30, 40 people most of the time, yeah. I mean, they give you lots of good food and whatever they can do. And then after finishing, then they send you to the bar, you go and enjoy with your beer or whatever and all.
Did you have to pay for any of the...
Nothing.
The food or the drink?
Nothing.
Seems there must have been a lot of money involved.
Oh, well, I don't know, but it was all free.
All free?
All free, yeah.
Satish Deela didn't think anything was untoward, nor did Christine Forrest, a good friend of his on the trips.
I'm going to be on the bus, and I am on the bus.
In April, she signed up for a weekend trip to Thanet. She even posted about canvassing voters by telephone from the bus. And once she arrived, they were joined by the candidate Craig McKinley and an army of other activists and volunteers. At the end of the day, the group ended up on the Margate seafront in accommodation at party expense.
Channel 4 News has now obtained this receipt, together with various emails, for a mass booking here, a hostel in Margate in the North Thanet constituency, for the night of Saturday the 11th of April, for 40 people. The bill for £715 for bed and breakfast was paid in advance by a gentleman called Stephen Canning, a member of the Conservative campaign team.
I'm on the Ream battle bus.
The young activist posted at least 4 appeals for people to attend Super Saturday events in Thanet to stop Farage, offering free transport, accommodation and drinks, including this one on the 11th of April. But the overall mastermind of the party's campaign in South Thanet was Marion Little, the Conservative campaign specialist. On the 12th of April, after the Super Saturday Stop Farage event, she sent this email to senior Conservatives, including Lord Feldman's sister, Deborah, who was in charge of the whole event. Marion Little wrote,
"Thank you for all of your efforts this weekend. With your help, we've achieved so much and out-campaigned the Kippers. We knocked on over 1,250 doors, delivered over 10,000 newsletters, plus localised flyers times 1,000, with over 300 calls made."
This picture shows Little celebrating victory at the Royal Harbour Hotel with Mark Clark. Our big puzzle is why so many of the hotel bookings in the elections we've looked at were attributed to her home address. Last month she was presented with an OBE by Prince Charles for political service, the citation said. We would have liked to have shown you the palace video of her getting her honour, but Marion Little refused permission.
Why is all those hotel bills attributed to Marion Little's home in Hertfordshire? Is that to keep the money off the books?
Absolutely not.
Is that a conspiracy to deceive returning officers?
Absolutely not.
The law says any costs spent on a specific candidate must be declared and kept below a legal cap. That cap was £15,016 in South Thanet. I went to the local council offices where, after the result, candidates had to submit their legal expense declarations.
On the 11th of June, Craig McKinley himself signed this return as a complete and accurate return as required by law. And attached to it are dozens of receipts, mainly printing, advertisements, the salary of his agent and a secretary, even £25 for the hire of a tandem. But nowhere in here are any of the hotels we've found. The Premier Inn, the Royal Harbour and the Alpha Hostel. Nowhere in that return is there anything to do with Road Trip 2015.
The Tories claimed they'd spent £14,837, just £179 below the legal limit. But we found more and more sums on top of that that were never declared. There's the more than £14,000 we've already revealed they spent on rooms at the Royal Harbour Hotel in Ramsgate, and another £4,000 plus at the Premier Inn in Margate. Now, the £715 at the Margate Hostel, and £2,000 or so for coach hire and rail fares to bring in activists. In total, that's more than £21,000 above the limit. So the Thanet campaign seems to have cost almost 2.5 times as much as legally allowed.
I think you're making lots of assertions.
Well, you spent
and I think that it's important.
tens of thousands of pounds in Thanet, way beyond the £15,000 limit. You spent £14,000 on one hotel.
Yeah,
a lot more on other hotels, a lot more on the road trip 2015.
Michael, we will give a full explanation of all of this to the Electoral Commission.
Why don't you give the full explanation to us?
Because I think that doing it
I mean,
walking down the
if
street...
you're innocent...
doing it down the street
we'll come round
is
to
not
your
the right
office
way
and
to
sit
do it.
down and do it.
I think that we should... I think it's important
If you're
to follow
innocent, then if there's a
the due
perfectly good
process.
explanation, why don't you give it to our viewers?
Well,
if you're innocent, why don't you explain to our viewers why you're innocent?
I think we will, and we'll do it
You'll
in
do
a
an interview.
systematic way with all the material in front of us, and we'll explain it properly and thoroughly.
Why don't you show us your legal advice?
Well, look, I think you've got a regulator in politics called the Electoral Commission.
Well, a limited regulator, as I'm sure you'll accept.
Nevertheless, they're the regulator, and I think it's very important that you allow them to carry out their job and do things in the proper way, and we will, of course, do everything we can to cooperate with them and give them all the information that they need.
Shouldn't the police look at this?
Well, you know, that's a matter. It's a matter for the authorities to work out the proper route. But I'm confident that we've done everything properly and in accordance with the law.
So why do all the hotel's bills go to Marion Little's home address?
Michael, I've given you an answer. Thank you.
Well, what is the answer? You haven't given me the answer.
Today, the Conservatives gave us a bit more. All local spending has been correctly declared in line with the requirements of the Representation of the People Act, they said, but added that they were now looking into the spending on the hostel in Margate. We will issue a full statement in due course, they said.
The Director of Public Prosecutions has been asked to investigate claims of a criminal conspiracy by the Conservative Party to hide election expenses. It follows an investigation by this programme which revealed almost £100,000 in seemingly undeclared spending in 3 by-elections in 2014 and in the general election last year. Now, UKIP has written to the DPP claiming that the Conservatives potentially conspired to pervert the course of a democratic election. The spending is already the subject of a probe by the Electoral Commission. Our political correspondent Michael Crick reports.
Generic Robert Edwards.
In 3 by-elections, Newark, Clacton and Rochester in 2014, and in South Thanet in last year's general election. This programme has shown in recent weeks how the Tories spent thousands of pounds which weren't declared on the candidates' legal spending returns. If those sums had been declared, the Tories would have spent well beyond their legal limits. But now UKIP have hit back. They've written to Alison Saunders, the Director of Public Prosecutions, asking her to investigate not just what they think are breaches of election law, but possible conspiracy.
The same people within the Conservative Party have been responsible for this expenditure and declarations. It is UKIP's view that this raises, at least on the face of it, the possibility that a conspiracy to commit offences has taken place.
UKIP say in their letter, these matters are of the gravest possible nature in a Western democracy, and they tell the Director of Public Prosecutions, the mere suggestion that the party of government has potentially conspired, perhaps even at the highest level, to pervert the course of a democratic election is one that requires your very serious personal attention.
Lord Feldman.
But last week, when I finally caught up with the Conservative Party chairman, Lord Feldman, he denied any such suggestions.
No, were you breaking the law?
We did everything in accordance with the rules.
Is that a conspiracy to deceive returning officers?
Absolutely not.
But this programme found evidence that Craig McKinley, the Tory MP who beat Nigel Farage in Thanet, seemed to spend almost 2.5 times the legal spending limit. He and his agent could be disqualified, his party forced to fight the seat again. It's clear that the Electoral Commission are now taking these allegations very seriously and examining them in some detail. But investigations like this can take many months, and the Electoral Commission may not conclude until after the 12-month limit that exists under election law for mounting a prosecution. However, it's also possible by law for the police to apply for a 12-month extension on that limit.
Michael Barnbrook, a local resident who stood for both the BNP and UKIP in the past, has been pursuing our allegations with Kent Police.
Before the 12-month limit expires, I shall write to the police and tell them I'm still waiting for a decision and make them aware that they can go to a magistrate's court and seek an extension of the time limit. So to prevent them saying after 12 months that unfortunately there's nothing they can do.
Do you think they will?
Well, if they don't, I shall make a formal complaint against them.
Meanwhile, we understand tonight that the Director of Public Prosecutions has now written back to tell UKIP they have no powers to investigate, but that they could invite the police to do so. We wait to see whether they will.
The Conservative Party admits tonight that they failed to declare tens of thousands of pounds in election expenses in last year's general election. So did they break the law? Good evening. For months, this programme has been asking the Conservative Party to explain tens of thousands of pounds of undeclared election expenses in numerous constituencies. Finally, today, the Conservative Party Central Office admitted that they had made an administrative error in their national election expenses declaration. This comes on the heels of the 4 parliamentary seats in which we have already revealed evidence that suggests overspending. Tonight, 9 more seats from last year's general election in which many thousands of pounds appear never to have been declared. The question tonight, will the police now prosecute? For months now, they've claimed all their election spending was carried out in accordance with the law. But the Conservative Party has now admitted it failed to properly declare tens of thousands of pounds in hotel costs during last year's general election. This programme has found the Tories spent more than £38,000 on hotels, for example, but didn't declare it to the Electoral Commission. The spending was part of the Battle Bus campaign, flooding 29 key seats with campaigners. The party insists the costs were part of national spending, but our evidence suggests much of the activity was indeed local. And if so, it should have been declared by individual candidates, and any false declaration would be a breach of the criminal law. In the first of a 2-part series, our political correspondent Michael Crick reports now from the southwest of England.
The Tories thought it might make the crucial difference, and maybe it did. Campaign battle buses have long ferried party leaders round the country, but this was new. A fleet of coaches to bus rank-and-file volunteers to battleground seats.
The plan was called Battle Bus 2015. The idea was that in the final 10 days of the campaign, Tory activists would be bussed from the safe constituencies to the marginal seats. There were 4 buses in all, which were carrying almost 100 party workers. A bus each in the southwest and in the Midlands, 2 smaller ones for the north.
Battle Bus is part of a pattern of Conservative election spending we've been exploring for 3 months now. First in South Thanet, where we found an undeclared £18,000 spent on hotels. Then fighting UKIP in the Newark, Clacton and Rochester by-elections. Tens of thousands more in undisclosed spending.
I think we've spent everything exactly according to the rules.
Tonight we visit the southwest, where the election was won, examining how the Tories wiped out their coalition partners. And I went there on a blue bus of my own. Channel 4 News has uncovered evidence that the Battle Bus 2015 campaign cost the Tories at least £60,000. Most of it went on more than 1,000 nights of accommodation. £38,000 never declared to the election authorities.
I'm on the bus.
I'm on the bus.
I'm on the bus.
I'm on the bus.
The Tories insist Battle Bus was totally part of their national campaign, and the cost was included on their national spending return. But we've found evidence the volunteers were working for local candidates, even giving out their leaflets. By law, all spending on a local campaign must be declared by the candidate, and the figure is strictly capped.
Make sure you get on the bus with Battle Bus 2015.
BattleBus 2015 was dreamt up by Mark Clark, the man known as the Tatler Tory. Clark strongly denies recent accusations. He bullied a young activist who later committed suicide. Clark devised a plan to supply dozens of extra volunteers to key seats in the final days of the campaign. An email we've obtained shows the strategy was agreed by the Tory top brass, party chairman Lord Feldman and his then co-chairman Grant Shapps, chief strategist Linton Crosby and number 10 political secretary Stephen Gilbert. So to the southwest, where the Tories won 14 seats, all from the Lib Dems. In all, BattleBus visited 9 southwest constituencies in the last 10 days, including North Cornwall. The bus brought up to 50 activists here on the 5th of May, just 2 days before polling. David Cameron came that day too, and even gave a pep talk on the BattleBus.
And Scott will be a fantastic member of Parliament. So thank you for coming. And this is I think we can do it.
Among those on the bus enthused by Cameron was Mahir Katan, who, like many fellow passengers, did pay a small contribution towards the cost of the trips. He's proud of his role in wiping out the Lib Dems across the region.
We changed the map in southwest of England.
You changed the map?
Yeah. We changed it from a different party to be a blue for Conservative.
Another email we've seen shows that when Mr. Katan and fellow BattleBussers went door to door that day, the local party gave them leaflets and Conservative HQ provided a script.
And this is that script. Hi, Mrs. Jones. My name's Michael Crick, and I'm calling on behalf of Scott Mann, your Conservative candidate. As you know, it's election day on Thursday. Everyone's talking about how this seat is one of just 23 we need to win to make sure David Cameron is in number 10, working through our long-term economic plan. A vote for anyone else in North Cornwall will mean Ed Miliband held to ransom by the SNP. And if Mrs. Jones wasn't in, she got this leaflet with David Cameron on one side, Scott Mann on the other. And in small print at the bottom, it says promoted by his agent.
Remember, the Conservatives insist BattleBus was a national expense. But Electoral Commission guidelines state if activists were being bussed in to particularly campaign for a candidate, then, according to the guidance that we provide, a candidate would have had to make a fair and honest assessment of this and include that in their spending return. So, we looked at Scott Mann's spending return. It makes no mention of the specially branded coach, which cost £1,133 a day. The Tories declared that as a national, not a local expense. No mention either of the Eden Project Youth Hostel, where the volunteers stayed that night. The cost, we've discovered, was £1,083, not declared at all. Had all these costs been disclosed, Mr. Mann's campaign would apparently have spent more than £2,000 over the legal limit. Scott Mann overturned a majority in North Cornwall of almost 3,000 for the Liberal Democrats. Now they're crying foul.
Well, it's very sophisticated. It seems very coordinated. It almost seems like a group of mercenaries come down and invaded our local community and other local communities down in the southwest.
But don't Liberal Democrats do the same thing when things get tight? You'll all go off to some constituency up in the Midlands or wherever?
Yes, but funded by our own pockets, not by people up in the city and up in London. We're a small party of local, dedicated, community-based people. Whatever happens here or happens where we go, be it somewhere else in the country, it's funded out of our own pockets. The rules are there to give everyone a level playing field. And if we don't all abide by it, it doesn't matter which party, then as far as the people are concerned, politicians are not trustworthy.
Thank you very much.
Legal responsibility for the Tory spending return lies with Scott Mann, the candidate, and his agent.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mann told us, my election agent made a return of my election expenses as required by law. The party's national bus tour was authorised and paid for by Conservative HQ. It was intended to promote the party's success in the general election and did not form part of my local election expenses. Mr. Mann may not be the only Tory with questions to answer about the cash spent on making them MPs. Battlebusser Mahir Katan says that in every seat they largely worked for particular candidates.
When we travel to any constituency, we're talking about the same candidate, and we encourage the people to voting for the candidate, our candidate, not to thinking about that we have to talking about the Conservative or we have to talk about the Prime Minister or the Cabinet. No, we're talking about this person, what he's going to do if he won this, if he win his seat.
So you were encouraged to talk about the particular local candidates.
Exactly.
And were told all about them so that you would know who you were talking about.
Yes.
If, as Mahir Katan says, the Battle Bus campaigned for specific candidates across the southwest, then the local spending returns should include costs for hotels and the bus. But we can't find any mention of them. Officially, in each of the 9 seats Battlebus visited, the Tories spent below the legal spending cap. But now, if you share out the £22,000 spent on Battlebus in the southwest, it seems 8 of the 9 elected MPs went over the limit. Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport was the only seat not to breach the cap.
What do you think of the Conservatives spending tens of thousands of pounds in by-elections?
For 3 months now, we've been asking the Tories about the money they've spent on election campaigns.
He's legged it. He's walked up the other way.
He said, come on.
Much of it seemingly undeclared. 6 weeks ago, I caught up with the Tory chairman, Lord Feldman.
Lord Feldman, did you break the law in spending all that money on those elections?
We did everything in accordance with the rules. We've declared it fully. We're happy to explain ourselves to the Electoral Commission. I think that's the sort of proper way of dealing with it.
Today, though, the Tories told us they did make an administrative error in failing to declare the hotel bills on the national spending return. But they insist the Battlebus was a national expense too, not local, and is on their national expenses. The Electoral Commission, which is already investigating our previous reports, say they'll look at any new details.
Last night, this programme revealed how the Conservative Party failed to declare tens of thousands of pounds spent campaigning in key marginal seats in last year's general election. Today, David Cameron weighed in, admitting an error that meant that costs of the so-called volunteer battle bus campaign were not declared. But he insisted the volunteers were campaigning for the party, not for the local candidates. So the costs didn't need to be declared on local spending returns. Tonight, we reveal new evidence that challenges that claim. We've looked at the 20 key Labour marginal seats in the Midlands and the North targeted by that battle bus tour and found documents and photographs suggesting they were campaigning for local candidates. Our political correspondent Michael Crick has this report.
Last night we revealed, and the Tories even admitted, more undeclared expenses from last year's election.
Come to an absolutely great seat. This is one of the 23 we need to win.
We showed how Conservative HQ bussed dozens of activists to the southwest, wiping out the Liberal Democrats there. Conservative headquarters says that Battlebus was part of a national campaign and therefore should go onto their national expenses, that it was to promote the party as a whole, not individual candidates in the constituencies. But we found evidence which would seem to contradict those claims. And the law says that any costs of local campaigning must be declared by the candidates themselves.
In recent weeks, we've also exposed tens of thousands of pounds of Tory expenses, which seem not to have been properly declared in 3 by-elections in 2014 and in South Thanet last year in the general election. Tonight, we're in the Midlands and the North, where traditionally it's Labour against Tory. Here, 3 more battle buses visited 20 marginal seats over a 10-day period, and the Tories won 17 of them. Tonight, we reveal tens of thousands more of election expenses, including hotel costs in Tamworth and Bolton, which we can't find declared anywhere. While the battle bus we featured last night went to the southwest, other buses toured the Midlands and North. The Midlands were crucial. The Tories had to hold several constituencies here to have any chance of winning the election. The Midlands battle bus visited 10 seats in the final 10 days. Here again we have found evidence of volunteers campaigning for specific candidates, and the Tories admit battle bus costs were not listed on the local spending returns at the time.
Here in the constituency of Amber Valley in Derbyshire, the Conservative MP was defending a majority of just over 500 votes, making it one of the most marginal seats in the whole country. And the Conservative battle bus came here on Saturday the 2nd of May, just 5 days before polling.
I'm on the bus.
Meet Theodora Dickinson, one of the volunteers on the Midlands bus. During the campaign, photos of her by fellow activists were put online, which highlight her work. Here she's on a doorstep with the local candidate's leaflet. Some of her colleagues posted tweets suggesting they too were doing local campaigning. One activist wrote,
1,300 voters talked to on the doorstep in Amber Valley today, for Nigel Mills.
Another wrote,
nice homes in the beautiful Amber Valley. Great reaction on the doorsteps in support of Nigel Mills.
All these photos and comments suggest these volunteers were campaigning for the local Conservative candidate. By law, all spending on a local campaign must be declared by the candidate, and the amount is strictly capped, usually between £12,000 and £15,000.
This is the official declaration of local spending which the Conservatives submitted here to the council in Amber Valley about 3 weeks after the election result, together with various receipts. Nowhere does it seem in these documents is there any mention of the battle bus. Nowhere does it seem is there any mention of that hotel in Tamworth, the Travelodge, where all the activists stayed. Nor was the hotel included on the Conservatives' declaration of national expenditure.
The legal spending limit in Amber Valley was nearly £15,000. Nigel Mills spent just under £14,000. Had the cost of the bus and hotels been included, however, then we reckon the local spending cap would seemingly have been exceeded by almost £1,000. We showed much of our evidence to the local Labour leader.
What do you make of those?
Well, I think I don't recognise any of the people or not, so I think it's quite clear that the Conservative Party were bussing in people to campaign on behalf of Nigel Mills, who actually didn't live in Amber Valley. The evidence you produced clearly shows that these people were using as part of a local campaign, and in reality should have been on the local expenses submitted by Nigel Mills.
But doesn't Labour do this sort of thing as well? Organise for people to come around the country and campaign for your candidate?
Oh, we had it, and we might have saved Amber Valley.
It seems battle bus volunteers did local campaign work in other Midland seats too. Here's Theodora Dickinson again in Wolverhampton South West, although there's no suggestion she and all the other activists are not doing anything they weren't told to do. And in Sherwood, more activists and more candidate leaflets, which quote him saying, "I called by today with my local team to hear your views." The day before polling, Battle Bus visited Dudley South in the West Midlands, a seat the Tories were defending.
Here's a bus leader and two activists wearing rosettes for the candidate Mike Wood. Battle Bus organisers later wrote to volunteers to thank them. The letter quotes Wood, now an MP, saying of the Battle Bus trip,
"It made a big difference. In every one of the 3 wards in Dudley South where Battle Bus campaigned on Wednesday morning, turnout was at least 10% higher than any of the other 3 wards. None of that would have happened without all the fantastic activists on the Battle Bus who came to help me the day before the election."
Note his use of the words "help me." The letter also says,
"We are immensely grateful to Lord Feldman for agreeing to fund Battle Bus 2015.
We find a similar story in the northwest. 2 small buses went to 5 seats each in 5 days, with volunteers staying 5 nights at a Holiday Inn. In Morecambe and Loonsdale, activists also tweeted photos in which they seemed to brandish local leaflets promoting a particular candidate. The buses were central to the Conservatives' 40-40 strategy. Defend 40 seats of their own, take 40 of their opponents.
The Conservative Party has been losing members for decades now. By the time of the 2015 election, probably it had around 150,000 members, but our research shows that probably only about 5 to 10% of those actually do any work for the party between elections. A few more at elections, but that's really not enough for the boots on the ground that you need to actually do the voter identification and getting people out to vote. And that's why Battle Bus was so important.
Once more, the costs of the buses and hotels for volunteers weren't declared in any local spending returns. In these 2 regions, the party spent £24,000 on buses and £23,000 on accommodation. By our reckoning, if these sums were split across all 20 constituencies Battle Bus visited, it would have added more than £2,000 in costs to each seat. That means 16 seats could have exceeded the spending cap. The rules on election spending exist to ensure a level playing field between parties. But the candidates in the seats Battle Bus visited have all told us their spending kept within the law. Tory HQ says Battle Bus was all national campaigning. But was it? We've obtained these emails and other documents prepared by Conservative Central Office, which seem to show that Battle Bus volunteers were helped to fight for local candidates as well as the National Party. Just before the Battle Buses set off for the marginal seats, Paul Abbott, the Chief of Staff to the then co-chairman Grant Shapps, sent out detailed emails with specific information about each seat. For example, volunteers were told that in Broxtowe, the local Tory MP Anna Soubry had secured compensation for local voters affected by a tram route. And in Cannock Chase, they were told that the candidate was fighting to secure the return of the number 32 bus route. Today, David Cameron responded. He said his party had made an error on its expenses, which they'll rectify with the Electoral Commission. The Tories won't say, though, if that error also includes the huge extra costs we've previously identified in South Thanet and the 3 by-elections. And was it really error or deliberate? The Electoral Commission has much to investigate, and maybe the police too.
Now, she's the Conservative candidate running for election as Police and Crime Commissioner for Devon and Cornwall on Thursday. With that same force already reportedly investigating spending on the party's Battle Bus visits to the region during last year's general election, Alison Hernandez has herself become caught up in the scandal. Before becoming PCC candidate, Ms Hernandez was the Conservative election agent in Torbay and faces questions now over the cost of bringing in activists to campaign for the man who actually won that seat. Our political correspondent Michael Crick has this report.
Bank holiday weekend on the English Riviera. Local police are revving up for a new commissioner who'll be elected this Thursday. the winner will have oversight of all law and order in Devon and Cornwall, powers over the almost £300 million local police budget, and even power to hire and fire the chief constable.
You're his boss.
The Conservative candidate for the £85,000 a year job is Alison Hernandez.
I am absolutely fundamentally clear that a police and crime commissioner who is here to represent you, not the police.
She's now in the spotlight, implicated in the election expense allegations by Channel 4 News, now being investigated by the Electoral Commission, and reportedly too by Devon and Cornwall Police.
The rest is on the leaflet.
At the general election exactly a year ago, Alison Hernandez was the agent to the Conservative candidate Kevin Foster here in Torbay. He defeated the sitting Liberal Democrat who'd held this seat since 1997. And in that role, she was legally responsible for this, the Tories' official expense return, detailing all the costs that the party had incurred getting Mr. Foster elected. 4 weeks after polling, she actually signed this document as a complete and accurate return as required by law. But now this return is coming under intense scrutiny amid claims that the Tories spent thousands of pounds on the campaign here getting Mr. Foster elected, which weren't included on this official return. In the last 10 days of the election campaign, the Conservatives deployed a fleet of buses to take activists to key seats around the country. Torbay was one of those key seats, long a Lib Dem stronghold. On the 29th of April, the battle bus rolled into Torbay to campaign for Kevin Foster. At the time, Alison Hernandez wrote on Twitter, "Got 50 volunteers arriving tomorrow for Kevin Foster." Then one battle busser tweeted, "At Preston Conservative Club after a hard day canvassing for Kevin Foster and co. Vote Conservative." The bus volunteers were put up in a hotel in Glastonbury at a cost of just over £1,300 a night. And Alison Hernandez organised local leaflets for the bus people to distribute. The cost of these leaflets was declared on the candidate's return, but the cost of bussing in the volunteers to distribute them wasn't. The law is clear. Any money spent campaigning for a local candidate has to be included on the legal local spending return for that candidate. The Lib Dem MP who lost Torbay is understandably furious.
You either have a system of fair spending or you have a free-for-all. And if this matter isn't tackled, then the party that has the most resource is going to be able to do it again and again and again. Then where's your democracy?
The spending return signed by Hernandez claimed the party spent just over £12,000. The daily cost of the coach and the accommodation was approximately £2,400. We've calculated the Tories would have overspent here by just over £1,400. It's reported Devon and Cornwall Police have begun a formal investigation into the Conservative spending in the South West. This could pose a dilemma. If Hernandez was elected, which force would investigate her? Or the other 3 seats in the patch which we spotlighted?
Sounds a bit dull.
Hernandez recently spoke about her potential role overseeing the Devon and Cornwall Chief Constable.
You don't become his boss. Yeah. Sort of.
He's employed by the Crown, so you're not... But I do directly appoint or dismiss them.
You're his boss.
Actually, in some of the electioneering...
The current police commissioner for Devon and Cornwall, Tony Hogg, was elected as a Conservative but quit the party last month. This situation dismays him.
Quite apart from the confusion that would occur if somebody is voted into this role and then misbehaviour is unearthed, the waste of opportunity time, the waste of money. Do we rerun an election? Millions of pounds there. I mean, I simply dread to think of the opportunity cost and the real cost of getting this wrong through some act of impropriety which is discovered after the election.
We asked all the PCC candidates for interviews. Labour's refused, as did independent Bob Spencer. But the other contenders would speak.
When you get issues about, I mean, the battle bus for the Tories or whatever, yes, of course they should be declared if you're talking about a local election, because it's only fair that you have, in my view, you set some sort of bar somewhere.
We're looking at criminal offences here, and you have to question whether somebody who perhaps has committed an offence that may be criminal is actually is right to stand for a police and crime commissioner who might be investigating something like that in the future.
Alison Hernandez, if she feels that she is under investigation, then she almost certainly should stand down.
Alison Hernandez says transparency and accountability are a key part of her campaign. Yet, when we asked to speak to her about her expense return at the general election, she told us in a statement that
the party's national bus tour was authorised and paid for by Conservative headquarters. It was intended to promote the party's success in the general election and did not form part of the local election expenses.
She didn't turn up at a hustings for all 6 candidates in Dawlish last night. But my colleague Ed Hauker did finally catch up with her this morning.
Wondered if you might answer some questions for us. Just specifically, how can you stand as PCC if the police investigate the election expenses you filed? Do you have any response for us? Any at all? Are you concerned you might seem evasive?
Yet tomorrow, an officer from Devon and Cornwall Police will attend a meeting with the Electoral Commission, the Crown Prosecution Service and other police to decide whether to go to court for more time to investigate whether agents and candidates around the country breached election law. And those inquiries may include Torbay and Alison Hernandez.
Now, there are a total of 6 candidates standing in Thursday's election to become Devon and Cornwall Police and Crime Commissioner, and here they all are.
Senior police officers from 18 different forces spent more than 2 hours at the Electoral Commission this lunchtime, together with officials from the Crown Prosecution Service. They had to decide their next steps on the allegations made by this programme about Tory spending in dozens of seats at the general election last year. We've shown how in South Thanet the Tories spent more than £20,000 on hotel bills for party staff and volunteers, which was not included on their legal spending return. And in dozens of seats from Cornwall to Lancashire, they spent tens of thousands on a fleet of battle buses and hotels to bus volunteers in to fight for specific candidates. Again, these costs weren't listed on those candidates' spending returns. Under election law, any offences have to be prosecuted within 12 months. And after today's meeting, the National Police Chiefs Council said it's now up to local forces to consider whether they want to apply for time extensions. But today's meeting was quite strained, we understand, reflecting the different responsibilities. And whilst we understand that the Electoral Commission urged police forces to apply for more time, some of them said they haven't yet seen the evidence to justify that, and haven't even seen all the evidence that the Electoral Commission's got. Earlier, the former Tory co-chairman Grant Shapps was grilled about the matter on the BBC Daily Politics.
But compliance wasn't my side of things. The campaigning side was my side, but not the money and the finance.
But you were behind this whole battle bus business.
It was the actual campaign itself, not the compliance.
So you didn't wonder as to where the charges were being made?
As I say, I'm not one to shirk my responsibilities. Well, I stood down on my own account for something unrelated to that, but this side of things was not my side.
But an email leaked to us suggests the Battle Bus project was very much Grant Shapps' baby. The organiser, Mark Clark, wrote to the North Cornwall campaign team on the 30th of April last year about Battle Bus.
It has the full financial, organisational and practical support of Conservative headquarters, the personal sponsorship of the party chairman Grant Shapps, and has been signed off by Lynton Crosby,
party strategist
Stephen Gilbert,
David Cameron's political secretary,
and Lord Feldman,
party co-chairman.
Where is the battle bus?
I caught up with Shapps myself.
The Battle Bus was a national campaign, and I think CCHQ...
It's a campaign for candidates locally.
Let me ask you a question. I think CCHQ took the view, or takes the view, as I understand it, it was all part of the national campaign, very well advertised, part of the national thing. One thing I didn't...
It's a campaign for local candidates like Scott Mann.
So one thing I wasn't responsible for, and I've taken responsibility for things that were, was the financing side and the compliance side, and they had a compliance department.
You must have known where the money was coming from.
Well, as I say, the compliance side wasn't my part of things,
well,
but
was it
the
Lord
national
Feldman's
part
then? Are you trying to blame him?
There's a compliance department.
David Cameron's political secretary Stephen Gilbert was also copied in to another email talking about the battle bus trip to North Cornwall the next day. Tomorrow is massive for the campaign, it said, and I believe could well make a difference. Attached was a briefing note telling volunteers to tell voters on doorsteps they were calling on behalf of Scott Mann, your Conservative candidate, adding, "This seat is one of just 23 we need to win to make sure David Cameron is in number 10. The implications of all this are potentially huge. If police forces were to go to court to ask for more time to investigate, they'd almost certainly have to name individual candidates and their seats, and that could put dozens of Tory MPs in the frame. And if those MPs subsequently were prosecuted, convicted and disqualified, then the government could, in theory, lose its slim majority in the House of Commons. Michael Crick, Channel 4 News at the Electoral Commission.
Well, we woke this morning to news of the Conservatives beating Labour in Scotland and another SNP triumph. But it looks tonight as if Labour has defeated the Tories here in London. What does any of it matter if elections are unfair and the rules guaranteeing their integrity are flouted? This programme has been investigating Conservative Party general election expenses in 27 key marginal seats last year. Several police forces across the country say tonight that they've started criminal investigations and have or will apply for the time limit for prosecutions to be extended. Here's our political correspondent, Michael Crick.
For 3 months, we've exposed how the Tories spent nearly £200,000 in 3 by-elections and last year's general election that weren't declared in their local spending returns. Lord Feldman, did you break the law in spending all that money on those elections? In Thanet South and in the by-elections?
No,
Were you breaking the law?
We did everything in accordance with the rules.
That sparked an investigation by the Electoral Commission, who last week asked the police to consider applying to extend the time limits for criminal prosecutions. And today, a whole flurry of police forces announced they would do just that.
The idea of a group of police forces coming together to coordinate an investigation and each one getting the extension of time to look into the election in their area is unheard of. And it means they are taking seriously as a police service the issues that were raised by the original Channel 4 News report and the issues that people like me have been worried about for a long time about malpractice in marginal seats, parliamentary seats, involving the major political parties in terms of how they spend and what they're prepared to admit to having spent.
So, who is being looked at? Alex Chalk and Neil Carmichael may fall under Gloucestershire Police's official investigation. West Yorkshire Police have confirmed they will seek an extension we understand covers Stuart Andrew in Pudsey. And Derbyshire Police will seek extensions too. That's Nigel Mills and Maggie Throop. Scott Mann, Kevin Foster, the Minister George Eustice and Oliver Colville are all being looked at in Devon and Cornwall. And Nottinghamshire say they will consider extensions. That means Business Minister Anna Soubry and Mark Spencer. In total, police may seek an additional 12 months to investigate up to 27 sitting MPs, including Craig McKinley, who beat Nigel Farage in South Thanet.
Unlike other criminal offences, election offences, the police and CPS have to bring their charges within a year. By being allowed this extension of a year, it will allow them time for the Electoral Commission investigation to come to an end, and it will give the police essentially one more year of investigating time to see if they need to bring charges.
The Commission is also investigating whether Conservative headquarters broke the law and failed properly to declare campaign spending. That includes £100,000 the party spent on 3 by-elections in 2014. The party has already admitted an administrative error meant that they failed to declare £38,000 in hotel costs for the Battle Bus campaign last year, which they claim were part of their national spending. Documents obtained by Channel 4 News indicate that the campaign was signed off at the very highest levels of the party, including the chairman, Lord Feldman, and the chief strategist, Lynton Crosby.
Sir Lynton Crosby for political service.
Mr. Crosby himself was at Buckingham Palace today, receiving a knighthood from Prince Charles. The Electoral Commission is conducting a full investigation that's expected to last for several months, and the information they obtain is due to be shared with police. Today's developments are a clear sign that they're taking this matter very seriously.
And Michael's with me here at City Hall. Just take us through the MPs and why it matters.
Well, you've got to remember here that this is all about a level playing field in elections. There are rules about how much you can spend in a local campaign, roughly £15,000. Now, the Conservatives insist that they kept within the rules. But under election law, if you're going to prosecute and try and disqualify and overturn a result, you've got to do it within 12 months. And the 12 months is very nearly up. And what's been happening today is police have been announcing that they're applying to have the 12 months extended by another 12 months, as they're allowed to by law. And indeed, Greater Manchester have already gone to court and got a 12-month extension. Now, the MPs who we think are probably being looked at are David Nuttall in Bury North, Amanda Milling, Cannock Chase, Michael Ellis in Northampton North, Scott Mann in North Cornwall, George Eustace in Camborne and Redruth, Kevin Foster in Torbay, Oliver Colville, Plymouth Sutton and Devonport, Graham Evans in Weaver Vale, and in Gloucestershire, either Alex Chalk in Cheltenham or Neil Carmichael in Stroud. The interesting one, though, the one that the Conservatives are probably most worried about, is South Thanet, where Craig McKinley beat Nigel Farage, the UKIP leader. That was the very first one we started investigating, and we haven't yet heard whether the Kent police are intending to go to court or indeed whether they're investigating.
I therefore give notice that Hernandez Alison Selina, the Conservative Party candidate, is duly elected as Police and Crime Commissioner for Devon and Cornwall Police Area.
Alison Hernandez may be Devon and Cornwall's new Police and Crime Commissioner-elect, but when she takes office tomorrow, she'll be the subject of a police investigation over her role in the election expenses scandal revealed by this programme. And today, the police force she'll be overseeing took the unprecedented step of recusing itself from the investigation, inviting an outside force to take over her case and 3 others in the area.
Or moving to another force, absolutely, it will be done diligently, effectively by that force, but there can be no taint or inference that in any way I have acted under duress, not that I would, or that Alison would place duress on the force, not that I'm sure she would.
Last year, Alison Hernandez was Conservative election agent in Torbay for Kevin Foster, who was then elected an MP. His was one of 29 constituencies visited by dozens of Tory activists who were shipped in on coaches and put up in hotels. But despite evidence showing that those volunteers were supporting the local candidates, the costs of that Battle Bus campaign weren't included in any of the candidates' local spending returns. In Torbay and many other seats, if these costs had to be included, they would have exceeded the local legal spending limit.
Wondered if you might answer some questions for us.
Before her election last week, we tried to talk to Ms Hernandez, but she declined.
The election expenses you filed?
Today, Ms Hernandez declined to do any media interviews, but did answer questions from a member of her staff, with her answers then put online.
At the moment, I haven't been approached by any authority, whether that's the police, the Electoral Commission or anyone, about such an investigation. The only people who have approached me is the media, so you can see why it's a bit frustrating for me at the moment.
She is the newly elected Police and Crime Commissioner for Devon and Cornwall, who is under police investigation over election expenses. But despite calls for her to step aside, Alison Hernandez has refused to do so and was sworn in today at a ceremony in Exeter. Today, the Police Federation in Devon and Cornwall, which represents the rank and file police officers, added their voices to calls for her to stand down. Our political correspondent, Michael Crick, has been down to Devon to catch up with Ms Hernandez.
At Exeter Guildhall this morning, an air of doubt. Would Alison Hernandez, about to be sworn in as Police and Crime Commissioner for Devon and Cornwall, answer questions about her role in the Tory election expenses scandal? What do you say to these people who are saying you should stand down?
I'll see you afterwards, Michael. I've agreed to do an interview. See you in a bit.
Then to the ceremony the Police Federation says shouldn't have happened.
Please be upstanding for the right word through Lord Mayor of Exeter and the Civic Party.
Last year, Miss Hernandez was election agent in Torbay for the new Conservative MP, Kevin Foster. But an investigation by this programme raises big questions about her role. His campaign benefited from volunteers brought in from outside on the party's so-called battle bus. But the hotel where they stayed and the bus which brought them in weren't declared in the candidate's local spending return, which was signed by her as accurate. The battle bus was instead declared on the Tories' national expenses. The hotel, not at all. Last week, before her election, we tried to ask Ms Hernandez about this, without success.
Just specifically, how can you stand as PCC if the police investigate the election expenses you filed?
I, Alison Hernandez of Torbay, do hereby declare that I accept the office of Police and Crime Commissioner for Devon and Cornwall. I will take all steps within my power to ensure transparency of my decisions so that I may be properly held to account by the public.
Yet Devon and Cornwall Police last week announced an investigation into their new boss, but that they'll farm it out to an outside force, as yet undecided. Conservative press officers from outside the area then tried to limit reporters to just 2 questions each.
Hello, Michael. Sorry, I haven't met you before.
No, that's because you ran away. If you believe in transparency, why did you run away from us during the election? Why didn't you answer questions and allow the people of Devon and Cornwall to decide about your integrity?
I think you'll find that I got elected on Thursday with the
Without
result
these
on
questions
Friday.
being aired?
They were aired, everybody knew about them, there wasn't any secrecy, was there? Because it was on the TV, and I got the people of Devon and Cornwall put their faith in me to ensure that I'm here to do a really good job of getting the best down to the police and keeping us safe.
Now, you claim that the costs of the battle bus operation, the hotels and the buses themselves, were a national expense. In which case, why did you, on your expenses, claim as a local expense 2,200 canvas cards to be distributed by those battle bus volunteers?
Well, as the election agent, I made a return of election expenses as required by law. Everybody has to do that as an election agent. And the national bus tour was authorised and paid for by CCHQ.
But it was to support local candidates like Mr Foster. In just 29 marginal
Michael,
seats.
Local expenses were on the local expense of the campaign. National expenses were on the national.
But the bus came to Torbay to support
Thank you, Michael.
You believe in transparency. Surely you can answer this
thank you.
question. The bus came to Torbay in order to support Mr Foster. The Chief Constable told us he's now approached 2 outside forces to carry out the investigation into Ms Hernandez. You're going to find it perfectly OK to work with Alison Hernandez, even though there's this suspicion about what she's been up to?
The job of policing is always complex. We work with people in delivering a public service. The construct that's put in place for the governance of policing is a matter for other people.
She could sack you, couldn't she?
Most certainly could.
You've got to be aware of that.
Not at all. Never, ever bothers me. I took an oath to deliver a policing service. That's what I do.
The Conservative Party, nationally and locally, insists that costs linked to the battle bus should be, and always have been, a national expense.
What I find interesting, nobody from the national other parties are making very much noise on this. They also have battle buses that went around. The allocation of the funding of it is a national, not a local commitment.
Meanwhile, Kent Police confirmed to Channel 4 News today that they're applying to a court for extra time to carry out an investigation into election expenses there. That's almost certainly the most interesting case of all in South Thanet, where the Conservatives, of course, beat Nigel Farage, the UKIP leader. Michael Crick, Channel 4 News, Exeter.
It is unprecedented in British legal history for the Electoral Commission to seek a court order against a major political party. The Conservatives insist that they had always intended to hand over the election expenses documents today. But tonight, the Commission forcefully disputed that. The documents relate to a Channel 4 News investigation into Conservative spending in 3 by-elections in 2014 and in last year's general election, which exposed tens of thousands of pounds in questionable spending. Michael Crick has this report.
This is serious stuff. A government body, the Electoral Commission, taking to court the government party. Today's application stems from hotel bills and other papers that this programme obtained earlier this year, exposing undeclared Conservative spending in South Thanet at last year's general election and in 3 by-elections the year before. In those contests, we found more than £100,000 in all spent on hotel bills which weren't declared on the party's legal expense returns.
He's legged it. He's walked off the other way.
He said, come on. The Electoral Commission announced an investigation into our findings. What's more, the Conservative chairman assured me his party would cooperate fully with that.
I think it's very important that you allow them to carry out their job and do things in the proper way, and we will, of course, do everything we can to cooperate with them and give them all the information that they need.
And yet today, the Commission announced the Tories hadn't complied with 2 disclosure orders they'd issued, seeking documents and information. One in February was partly answered, they say, a second in March, not at all. Deadlines came and went, and today the Commission lost patience, announcing,
"We are today asking the court to require the party to fully disclose the documents and information we regard as necessary to effectively progress our investigation into the party's campaign spending returns."
The Electoral Commission are being surprisingly assertive in this dispute, given that they want more powers from the Conservative government and, of course, depend on them for money. The Conservatives say they told the Commission a fortnight ago that they'd produce the documents by 1 o'clock today. The Electoral Commission flatly deny that. They say they weren't told that by the party. Anyway, some documents did arrive this lunchtime, and the Commission have spent the afternoon going through them to make sure they're what they asked for. The Commission will no doubt then decide whether they need to proceed with the High Court application.
I, Alison Hernandez of Torbay.
Meanwhile, it's been announced that West Mercia Police will now investigate Alison Hernandez, who was sworn in on Tuesday as Police and Crime Commissioner of Devon and Cornwall, giving her oversight of the local force there. Ms Hernandez, who was Tory agent in Torbay last year, was implicated in this programme's recent investigations into the Conservative Battle Bus project, which shipped Tory volunteers to help candidates in marginal seats. We don't think she's affected, though, by today's Electoral Commission court request.
Well, it's a storm in a team cup, if I'm really honest. You know, let's be honest, this is politically motivated. I'm very calm about the whole thing. I have nothing to hide.
We were also told today that Ms Hernandez will be investigated too by the Independent Police Complaints Commission.
And Michael Crick is with me now. Michael, what more can you tell us?
Well, I think it's important to stress that this tussle today between the Electoral Commission and the Conservative Party, we think solely relates to the 3 by-elections in 2014, Newark, Rochester and Clacton, and the important South Thanet battle at the general election. It doesn't, we think, apply to all the battleground seats, more than 24, that we've been reporting on for the last few weeks. And it's quite possible the Electoral Commission have also asked, quite likely, they've also asked for disclosure of documents relating to those contests too. Second, we now know there are at least 10 police forces taking action over our allegations. In most cases, they are going to court and asking for an extension on the 12-month time limit that there is for prosecutions under electoral law. Third, we haven't really appreciated, I don't think, the sense of crisis within Conservative HQ. A senior Tory told me today it's absorbing, quote, it's absorbing a significant amount of senior management time. One problem is that the man who advised the Conservative Party board that this was all fine and legal and they needn't worry has been off work for several weeks now, ill, and that is obviously making it a lot more difficult for Lord Feldman to get to grips with this crisis.
Now, first it was the Conservatives. Now questions are being asked about whether Labour properly declared its expenses in last year's general election. The claims focus on battle buses used by the party called the Labour Express, which took activists to key marginals. The party didn't appear to declare the costs on their local expense returns, but as part of the national campaign. Labour said tonight its spending was within the law and the rules set out by the Electoral Commission. Our political correspondent Michael Crick has this report.
We can only change Britain if we win, so we're wasting no time getting that message out there.
It was a key part of Labour's general election campaign. Bus tours around marginal seats, the battlegrounds. But now there are questions about whether Labour, like the Tories, should have declared the costs of such trips as local spending.
We're hitting key seats to talk with people about Labour's better plan.
Here's the Labour Express bus arriving in Cleethorpes in January last year, with MPs Jonathan Ashworth and Rachel Reeves. It was Ashworth, the party's deputy campaign chief, who ran the Labour bus tours. A few weeks later, on the 18th of February, for instance, Ashworth called for volunteers for what he called a 3-seat challenge in Harrow and Ealing, supporting 3 Labour candidates in one day, including Rupa Huck. But she didn't declare the cost of the bus on her expense return. Labour says it was a national expense. And here's a retweet from Mr Ashworth, this time about the bus heading for Pudsey and Keighley. Again, the costs don't seem to have been disclosed on the 2 candidates' local spending returns. Yesterday, as questions arose about Labour buses, the original tweet by someone else was mysteriously deleted. Labour, like the Tories, insists that its Labour Express bus was part of a national tour and therefore didn't need to be declared locally. That may explain why in recent weeks the Labour Party has been almost totally silent on this issue of Conservative election expenses at the last election and the revelations that we've been making on this programme. But the ceasefire between the parties on this issue was broken last Friday by the Tory Business Minister Anna Soubry. On the day it emerged, Nottinghamshire police were examining her local expense return. She asked the MP Rachel Reeves on Twitter,
"Can you confirm Labour Express was part of your national returns?"
Rachel Reeves replied,
"If you think Labour has done anything wrong, pop down to your local police station. In the meantime, get your own house in order."
From what we've found so far, there are big differences between Labour and the Tories on this. For as well as the buses, the Tories admit that they spent almost £40,000 on more than 1,100 nights of accommodation for volunteers in hotels, costs which were never officially declared. Now, if that money had been declared on local candidates' spending returns, then almost 24 Tory MPs would appear to have breached the local spending limits in their constituencies. Labour, in contrast, says it didn't spend anything on hotel costs for volunteers, and so far, no evidence has emerged to contradict that. Under the rules, it does seem Labour should have declared their bus costs locally, but in none of the 19 seats we've looked at would they have breached the spending cap.
Even if the money was allocated to the local campaigns, that because the Labour Party spent so much less at the election, it would be less likely to have pushed local candidates over the election spending limits. The biggest difference, of course, is that ultimately most of the Conservative candidates actually won. So if there are to be criminal convictions as a matter of election law, the by-elections we'll be seeing will be at least mostly Conservative MPs who are losing their seats.
At least 11 police forces are now investigating Tory election expenses, though the party says it acted within the law. This affair at heart raises questions about the integrity of the level playing field designed to make British elections fair.
So we begin tonight with that news that the SNP has asked the Metropolitan Police to investigate whether the Conservative Party is guilty of a, quote, systematic attempt to circumvent electoral legislation over its election expenses claims. Allegations first uncovered by this programme centre on whether the costs of busing Conservative activists into marginal seats should have been declared by candidates contesting those seats. The party says that apart from an administrative error in failing to declare one set of expenses, the rest were declared as part of national spending. The Prime Minister said today that he was confident it could all answer all the questions being put to it. Well, in a moment, we'll hear from the SNP. But first, here's Paul McNamara.
Receipt after receipt, amounting to thousands of pounds worth of seemingly undeclared expenses. But do they amount to more? Today, an SNP MP has asked the Met Police to investigate if they amount to a serious breach of electoral law. In a letter that escalates further our election expenses investigation, Pete Wishart writes,
"The Conservative Party as a whole must be properly investigated to ascertain if there was any systematic attempt to circumvent electoral legislation defining candidate and national expenditure."
This is the Newark by-election in 2014. 3 months ago, Channel 4 News revealed that in this key by-election, and 2 others during 2014, the Tories had seemingly failed to declare tens of thousands of pounds worth of hotel accommodation for party workers. Hundreds of receipts appear to reveal a pattern of undisclosed spending and link directly to Conservative HQ and senior figures within the party. Figures like Stephen Gilbert, who was then Political Secretary to the Prime Minister David Cameron. The vast majority of these hotel stays were booked under the home address of Marion Little, a senior staffer at Conservative Central Head Office. At the time, the Conservatives told us all by-election spending has been correctly recorded in accordance with the law. This is the Tory battle bus from last year's general election, which shipped activists to key constituencies. Last month, we revealed that Conservatives put many of these activists up in hotels, and again seemingly failed to declare them. Expenses that would have put local campaign spending way over strict limits. The Conservatives say that this was an administrative error and relates to national rather than local spending. According to this email leaked to us, all spending for Battle Bus had the blessing of Tory grandees, including party strategist Linton Crosby, Stephen Gilbert again, and party chairman Lord Feldman. Lord Feldman, who is the man looking into this, according to David Cameron, who was quizzed about the election expenses by Rai TV's Robert Peston.
In the end, I'm responsible for everything, but I'm very confident that the Conservative Party is gripping this with the chairman, Andrew Feldman. You know, lots of political parties have these bus tours, you know, buses that go round different constituencies, and that is a national expense. But this is all now in conversation with the Electoral Commission and these other investigations, so we should let that take its place. But I'm confident the idea of a bus that is a national bus that visits constituencies, I think the Labour Party's done that, the Liberals have done it, we've done it.
But if you're found to have broken the rules, do you think your great friend Lord Feldman will have to stand down as chairman?
I don't believe we have done anything wrong. If there were misdeclarations or things left out, we have to put those in place, but I'm confident we can answer all the questions that are being put to us.
The Prime Minister is right. Labour did also have a bus dubbed the Labour Express, and Labour did not declare any transport costs for it at local level. Like the Tories, they claim it's a national, not local expense. There is one key difference between the Labour and Conservative bus tours: hotels. Labour say that they never spent any money putting volunteers up in hotels during tours, and so far no evidence has emerged to contradict them. But Channel 4 News has already revealed that the Conservatives spent more than £38,000 putting their volunteers up in hotels during tours. £38,000 that was never declared anywhere. The Tories say this was an administrative error. And of course, all of this follows other revelations by Channel 4 News that the Conservatives seemingly failed to declare almost £100,000 worth of hotel accommodation during 3 key by-elections in 2014. Around the country, more than 10 police forces are investigating around 24 MPs and their election expenses. It's unlikely that today's letter from the SNP will be the last of the police's involvement in this ongoing investigation.
Paul McNamara reporting. Well, in the last hour, we've received this response from a Conservative Party spokesman. Presumably, Channel 4 will also be making it clear to their viewers that the SNP ran a helicopter campaign for Nicola Sturgeon, which was declared in the same way as the Conservative battle bus. Well, before we received that statement, I spoke to the SNP's MP, Pete Wishart. I asked him why he had written to the Metropolitan Police calling for that new investigation.
Well, I think we all know there's ongoing police investigations into several of the candidates that contested the 2015 general election. It's right and proper that they are properly conducted and carried out. But I think there's massive questions for the Conservative Party nationally to answer here, because it's pretty clear that this coordination of these buses and this accommodation was actually happened in central office for the Conservative Party. So what I've done is I've asked the Metropolitan Police to do an investigation, find out what's going on and try to find out what has happened. I mean, we have to have total trust in the integrity of our electoral system. If there's any question that that's been subverted, it must be properly looked at.
And what is your accusation here?
Well, we know that it was the Central Party Conservative office that coordinated this activity, that sent these battle buses, that sent these activists. Now, what they've tried to do, as far as I can see, is to pass this off as national spending, where it's quite clearly candidate spending that should have been properly recognised as such in any return to the Electoral Commission. So I'm asking the Metropolitan Police to examine, to investigate this, to see what was going on and to get to the heart of this matter.
And can you give me cast-iron assurances that the SNP, your party, has never done anything like that itself?
Well, we've certainly not run battle buses and shipped in loads of activists in order to try and influence marginal constituencies and campaigns. And I think we're all becoming a bit frustrated in what's going on in the Conservative Party. I've asked on several occasions in the House of Commons for this government to make a statement on this, even just to recognise how serious this is. They've thus far refused to do it. So now is the time for the police to properly investigate this. There's huge public concern about all of this. This is about the integrity of our electoral system. We have got to have full trust and faith in this. Electoral rules and laws are there for a very clear reason, and that is to protect the electorate and make sure we have a level playing field. So let's make sure this is properly examined and investigated.
Now, 18 police forces have confirmed they have or will now apply for more time to investigate the Conservative Party over their election expenses. But in one region, Kent, the Conservatives are fighting back and will go to court next week to stop a police investigation taking place. The seat is South Thanet, where the Tories defeated the UKIP leader Nigel Farage in a fierce fight. Tonight, this programme can reveal new evidence of the huge resources the Conservatives poured into South Thanet, including senior party figures who ran the campaign, and yet another battle bus, which doesn't appear to be included in the election returns. Our political correspondent Michael Crick reports.
That's not too bad, is it? South Thanet was the big battleground of last year's election. The Tories notched a plum victory when their man Craig McKinley thwarted UKIP leader Nigel Farage.
18,838.
But now the party's taking the unprecedented step of trying to oppose a police investigation into whether they correctly declared the money they spent here. The law says any sum spent promoting the local candidate must be declared by the candidate and agent on their legal spending return. Failure to declare is a criminal offence.
3 months ago, an investigation by this programme found nearly £20,000 of Conservative Party spending here in South Thanet on hotels, staff and activists that was either declared nationally rather than locally or not declared at all. Much of it was booked in the name of a senior member of Conservative staff and billed to her home address. Tonight, we have new evidence that shows the scale of the Conservative operation here and how the campaign in South Thanet was run by a team parachuted in from party headquarters.
Crucial to the whole operation was Marion Little, a Tory HQ campaign expert sent to save South Thanet from UKIP. Seen here in the McKinley campaign office, she ran it like a big by-election.
When a party decides to throw all their best people, or some of their best people, at a particular seat, that normally happens in a by-election, when there's only one election up for grabs. It's unusual for a particular seat in a general election, when there are 650 seats being contested, to attract quite such a targeted assault.
In the Broadstairs office, this big campaign schedule was photographed by Emily Ashton from BuzzFeed. It shows that on the 9th of April, Transport Minister John Hayes visited Manston Airport, a big local issue. A conference room at the Airport Holiday Inn was booked for the event and paid for by Marion Little. Again, it didn't appear on the local return. And almost every day they held what was called a big canvass, such as in Sandwich the same day. A Conservative battle bus brought outside volunteers down to help Craig McKinley. On board, party chairman Grant Shapps.
I thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming down, supporting me today. Let's go campaigning.
Celebrity visits were frequent on the 21st of April. Boris Johnson, and when he came, this campaign chaperone looked after him. William Saunders, who was based in South Thanet for 20 days. Here's his hotel bill at the Premier Inn.
Hello, Marion Little. My name's Ed Howker. I'm a journalist at Channel 4 News. I wondered if I might ask a few questions.
Yesterday we found Marion Little, the Thanet campaign boss, and tried to ask her about all this.
I was told that you were the mastermind of it. Is there anything you can explain about it? Anything at all?
Little was one of the top Tory staff whose stay at the Royal Harbour in Ramsgate cost more than £14,000 in all. There too was Henry McCrory, the party's former press chief, and Nick Timothy, previously an advisor to Theresa May, as well as Stephen Parkinson, another former May advisor, who told me the party paid for his room at the Royal Harbour too.
It was the target of all targets, really, for the Tories. They had to hold it. They had to stop Farage getting into Parliament, and they reflected that by throwing the kitchen sink at it.
So vital was South Thanet that on polling day, Twitter shows both party chairmen Grant Shapps and Lord Feldman came down on a battle bus to help get out the vote. They were even waved off by Jim Messina in the middle, the Obama pollster hired as a Tory strategist. The fact so many bigwigs visited that day shows that unlike any other seat, South Thanet was their campaign. But there's an extra twist. We found the extra £400 it cost to hire the bus that day doesn't appear to have been declared anywhere. In response to all this, the Conservatives told us tonight all spending has been correctly recorded in accordance with the law.
Following our investigations, more than 10 different police forces now around the country have applied to extend the 12-month legal deadline that there is on prosecutions under election law, allowing the police more time to investigate. And perhaps it's no surprise that it's only here in South Thanet that the Conservatives sent along one of the country's top lawyers to try and stop the police investigation here in its tracks.
An open court in Folkestone will hear the case resume next Wednesday, and opposing QCs argue whether the police should get more time.
For months, this programme has been investigating the Conservative Party's spending in South Thanet during last year's general election.
18,838.
We reported how the party spent almost £20,000 supporting their candidate Craig McKinley, who battled to defeat UKIP's Nigel Farage, money that was either declared as national spending, not local spending, or not declared at all. Today, the battle moved here to Folkestone Magistrates Court. A district judge heard how Craig McKinley and his agent may have bought an election, and that police needed more time to investigate. But a top lawyer representing Craig McKinley told the court that the police had dragged its heels and that the time extension they wanted should be thrown out. Every party agreed that it's vital to ensure that elections are fair, but James Laddie QC, acting for Mr McKinley, said that the police had been too slow this time and that their investigation amounted to little more than writing to the MP. If they wanted an extension from the court, he said, they would have to show that the circumstances were exceptional. And if the matter was so serious that it was exceptionally serious, he said, you would have expected a corresponding amount of diligence in the work that they have done investigating Craig McKinley. But Timothy Straker QC for Kent Police argued that his client is working with the Electoral Commission, whose investigation the court heard had been frustrated by the failure of the Conservative Party to cooperate. In a submission to the court, the Electoral Commission said,
the investigation has been delayed and hindered by the failure of the Conservative Party to provide complete and timely disclosure. There is very significant public interest in this matter. The implications of the allegations are that individuals and/or the Conservative Party may have committed deliberate acts intended to circumvent the party and election finance rules. These allegations go to the very heart of our democracy.
Our investigation has revealed how top Conservative Party staff, like campaign specialist Marion Little, were parachuted into South Thanet to take over the campaign. Hotel bills reveal a large number of workers were put up in hotels, including the party's former head of press and 2 special advisers who had worked for Theresa May. And the party used branded battle buses to bring more activists into the constituency to campaign for Craig McKinley. But the costs of it all were not declared on McKinley's spending return, and today the judge agreed that that should be investigated. In the end, the judge was satisfied that the investigations into Conservative election expenses were wholly exceptional and unprecedented in scale. District Judge Barron also said that the matter went far beyond the usual circumstances. So what this boiled down to is that question of delay. And the judge said that he was not satisfied that sufficient investigations had been undertaken by Kent Police. Today, the defeated candidate Nigel Farage had this to say.
Well, I'm very surprised that the Conservative Party hired one of the most expensive QCs in the country to try and stop the police continuing with their investigation. And it all sort of makes me wonder, do they have something to hide?
The Conservative Party insists all its spending was carried out in accordance with the law. In the case of South Thanet, that is now a matter for Kent Police to determine.
Why have you been prepared to spend money on a QC to try and stop police investigating what we have revealed?
Well, we haven't been doing that. What we're doing is we are cooperating with the...
You had a QC in the Thanet South constituency, in the court, actually asking the judge to stop the investigation.
Well, there's a year-long process of investigating these things.
But you didn't want that year. You
well,
actually
there was
you
a
went
whole...
to court to ask the court not to allow the police an extension to go on investigating these abuses.
That's right. As I said, there had been a year, and it's perfectly legitimate to argue, well, that's enough time to look at it. But look, I'm very happy for the Electoral Commission to examine all of this.
Well, why get a QC to stop it then?
Well, that was in one particular seat. But I'm very happy that they've got the time now, and they've got all the paperwork to examine this. But I do
Well,
think...
they have got the paperwork, but, Prime Minister, with respect, the Electoral Commission had to go to court to wring the papers out of you.
They didn't have to go to court.
They did.
They didn't.
They did.
That's not right.
You were 3 days overdue, and they had to go to court.
We had told them when the papers were going to be delivered, and so in our view, that was unnecessary.
That is not their view.
Well, that is not my view.
Will you, as Prime Minister, move this thing speedily through so that it can be resolved as quickly as possible? Because at the moment, your own majority, if any of this is proved, is in serious danger.
Well, what we're doing is answering the questions of the Electoral Commission. As I say, I think, look, it's a Channel 4 investigation, and I know you're proud of the work that you've done. We're very happy. We're answering all the questions. I think you're making quite a large mountain out of what I think is a relatively
So you disagree with the judge, then?
No. I think it's a relatively straightforward set of questions that we have to answer. I'm very confident we're going to answer all of them and put this issue comfortably away.
He's been called the most powerful man in Britain. But tonight, Nick Timothy, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, is in the spotlight for his role in the Conservative election expenses scandal. This programme has confirmed that Mr Timothy played a part in the controversial campaign in South Thanet, which is now under investigation by the police. The party insists Mr Timothy and other key workers sent to that constituency worked only on the national campaign and not for the local candidate. But new evidence obtained by this programme, Channel 4 News, suggests key Conservatives did work on the local campaign. And there are serious questions for the MP, Craig McKinley, over whether he fully disclosed everything he knew about the operation to the police. Michael Crick has this exclusive report.
For many months, this programme's been investigating what the Conservatives spent at the 2015 election. And we've found evidence of questionable spending in many seats. But one stands out: South Thanet in Kent, where the party thwarted UKIP leader Nigel Farage. And a key figure in South Thanet was Nick Timothy, who now, as Theresa May's Joint Chief of Staff in Number 10, is said to be the most powerful man in Britain. Described by one minister as her Rasputin. No wonder Mr Putin sought him out. The Conservatives are playing down Timothy's role in Thanet, but tonight we reveal its full extent. Indeed, Nick Timothy was widely credited with winning the South Thanet campaign.
Nick Timothy had some success helping to run various by-election campaigns before the 2010 election, and Linton Crosby was clear that he was the right man to take charge of the campaign in South Thanet. So he went down there with that experience and with a fine mind for political campaigning, and effectively helped shake things up and took charge of that operation and delivered a success for the Tories.
And the Conservatives, we found, spent tens of thousands of pounds in South Thanet. Money either not declared on the local legal return, or which they claimed was national spending, which is also regulated by law. The Electoral Commission and Kent Police are now investigating our findings.
At the heart of these investigations is a very simple question. Did the Conservative candidate here last year, Craig McKinley, now the MP, properly declare all the money that was spent on his campaign, as he was obliged to do under the law? Or did the Conservatives spend far more and instead claim that it was part of their national campaign, rather than the local effort to get him elected?
This is the Royal Harbour Hotel in Ramsgate. During the 2015 Thanet campaign, the Conservatives hired this plush location as an HQ for the crack team sent down to make sure McKinley beat Farage. Several key figures in the Tory campaign had rooms here, as the owner told me earlier this year.
It was a sort of, headquarters for them?
It was, yes. Well, all hotels become headquarters, unofficially sometimes, but they all hang around and somewhere they can talk and eat.
The team at the Royal Harbour included Sam Armstrong from the Conservative campaign department, Marion Little, Tory campaign specialist, and the party's former head of press, Henry McCrory, on contract. But reportedly in charge of strategy was Nick Timothy, temporarily stood down as Mrs May's top political advisor at the Home Office. We found Mr Timothy on one picture lurking behind May and the Tory candidate Craig McKinley.
Craig McKinley, the Conservative Party candidate.
Two respected books about the election and the Conservative Home website have talked about how Timothy led the campaign in South Thanet. He was praised too on Twitter.
Great to see Nick Timothy, who ran Craig McKinley's campaign in Thanet, is to lead the New Schools Network. Congratulations.
Mr Timothy even retweeted that and replied,
"Thanks, Peter. See you soon."
And in a phone call with Channel 4 News last May, Nick Timothy seemed to confirm his work in the seat, telling us,
"I was in Thanet. I worked on a variety of things to do with the campaign in Thanet and around the country."
When we asked Conservative headquarters about Nick Timothy's role in the South Thanet campaign, this is what they said. During the 2015 general election, Mr Timothy was a volunteer for the Conservative Party. His role included briefing policy and political work on Home Office policy, briefing party spokespeople on Home Office policy, supporting Theresa May, and working on a variety of other matters for the Conservative Party during the campaign. But that doesn't explain why Mr Timothy felt the need to stay here in the constituency where the party wanted to defeat Nigel Farage. Nor does it explain why so many people thought Mr Timothy was the brains behind the campaign, sent down here by Linton Crosby.
And that is what Kent Police are looking at. Because if Nick Timothy and his colleagues did work on Craig McKinley's local campaign, at least some of the £14,000 spent at this hotel should have been declared. And that would have put them way over the legal limit of just over £15,000. But neither McKinley nor his agent declared a penny of the Royal Harbour bill. Instead, it went on the Tories' national spending return.
Earlier this year, Detective Sergeant Brian Gillam of the Serious Crime Directorate of Kent Police wrote to Craig McKinley and asked him a very direct question. Had any of the people who stayed at the Royal Harbour Hotel been engaged on the local campaign at any time?
The MP replied,
I can confirm that nobody staying at the hotel was subject to my or my agent's control or direction. Any National Conservative Party staff based in the Royal Harbour Hotel were part of a national campaign team.
And yet we've examined scores of pictures and documents from the Thanet contest which show not just Nick Timothy, but others at the Royal Harbour were closely involved in Craig McKinley's campaign.
We've got numerous photographs showing Henry McCrory out campaigning with Craig McKinley. There's McCrory, there is McKinley. On that one, there is McCrory and McKinley again. Not only that, South Thanet Conservatives issued numerous press releases in which they advised journalists to contact Henry McCrory and even gave his mobile phone number at the bottom. It's hard to think of a more clear example than a press release to show that somebody was closely involved in the local campaign. And there are pictures, too, of another Royal Harbour guest, Sam Armstrong. There he is, out on the streets with Craig McKinley. And so involved was Mr Armstrong in Craig McKinley's campaign, he even registered a website called whereisnigel.com to try and show that Nigel Farage was hardly ever in the South Thanet constituency.
Later, as an MP at Westminster, McKinley made Sam Armstrong his Chief of Staff. The SNP MP Tommy Shepherd queries why, if Nick Timothy and his colleagues weren't helping Craig McKinley, did they base themselves in a remote seaside resort in Kent?
That seems an odd place to base your national campaign staff. So, you know, it looks very likely, and there is a lot of evidence to suggest that these people were directly and centrally involved in Mr McKinley's campaign, and the expenses related to that ought to have been declared. And I think, I think it's time to come clean.
Craig McKinley says his local spending declaration was lawful and proper, while the Conservatives say they've always acted entirely in accordance with the law. Nick Timothy, they add, hasn't been interviewed by either the police or the Electoral Commission. Kent Police told us their officers are still investigating, working with the Commission.
Michael Crick reporting, and you can find out more of this and more coverage of the whole election expenses story on our website, channel4.com/news.